Beneath the dense canopy of forgotten forests and the shifting sands of long-abandoned deserts lie chambers sealed for centuries, their silence guarding secrets no living hand was meant to disturb. Archaeologists, drawn by whispers of gold, inscriptions and relics, have pried open these ancient vaults, stepping into spaces where the air is thick with the weight of the past. Watch closely as we follow their footsteps through shadowed corridors and vaulted tombs, where each artifact and inscription seems to hold a fragment of lives long buried. From Egyptian crypts to Mesoamerican temples, the discoveries reveal both the ingenuity of civilizations and the mysteries they sought to conceal. The past lingers here, stubborn and inscrutable, and some doors may never have been meant to open. Tutankhamun's burial chamber. The Valley of the Kings stretches across the western desert of Luxor like a graveyard carved into stone, its cliffs holding the remains of Egypt's New Kingdom pharaohs. By the early 20th century, scholars believed the valley had been thoroughly exhausted by centuries of excavation and looting. Most royal tombs had been entered in antiquity, stripped of valuables, and left damaged beyond recovery. Yet beneath layers of rubble near the tomb of Ramesses VI, an unassuming sealed doorway remained hidden, concealing what would become known as Tutankhamun's burial chamber. Closed since the late 14th century BCE and undisturbed by human presence. Howard Carter's search for the tomb was driven by fragmentary clues rather than certainty. He believed that objects bearing Tutankhamun's name, found scattered in other locations, indicated a burial still undiscovered. In November 1922, Carter's team uncovered the top of a stairway carved into the bedrock. As the steps were cleared, a plastered doorway emerged bearing intact royal seals. These seals confirmed that the chamber beyond had been intentionally closed by ancient officials, marking a completed burial meant to remain untouched for eternity. The decision to open the doorway marked a turning point that could not be undone. Carter carefully cut a small hole through the sealed entrance, allowing centuries-old air to escape into the corridor. Peering inside by candlelight, he saw a crowded antechamber filled with furniture, chariots, statues, and gilded objects stacked haphazardly against the walls. The disorder suggested a hurried burial, but the intact seals made one thing clear. The chamber had never been entered since it was sealed, and nothing inside had been prepared for return. Beyond the antechamber lay the burial chamber itself, smaller and more confined than expected for a royal tomb. Its walls were painted with ritual scenes depicting Tutankhamun's journey into the afterlife, executed quickly and without the refinement seen in other royal burials. At the centre stood a large quartzite sarcophagus, enclosing a series of nested wooden shrines sealed one within another. Each layer represented a deliberate barrier, both physical and symbolic, separating the dead king from the living world and reinforcing the finality of the chamber's closure. When the nested shrines and coffins were opened in stages, they revealed the mummy of Tutankhamun encased in gold and linen. The body had been sealed with resins and oils used during mummification, substances intended to preserve the king eternally within a closed environment. The burial chamber functioned as a sealed system designed to remain stable and isolated. Once breached, that stability vanished. Exposure to light, air, and human contact initiated chemical and biological changes that no one present fully understood at the time. The unease surrounding the tomb intensified with the death of Lord Carnarvon in April 1923. He died from blood poisoning following an infected mosquito bite, only months after the burial chamber was opened. Newspapers quickly linked his death to the excavation, reviving ancient beliefs about curses protecting royal tombs. Although no curse inscription existed within the chamber, the coincidence proved powerful. Several other individuals connected to the tomb later died prematurely, cementing the perception that opening the sealed chamber carried consequences. Modern science has offered rational explanations without dispelling the discomfort. The tomb's sealed environment may have harboured dormant fungi or bacteria capable of causing respiratory infections when inhaled. Toxic moulds, along with chemical compounds released from resins and embalming materials, likely accumulated over centuries without ventilation. These hazards were invisible and unknown to early 20th century excavators. The burial chamber had been sealed precisely to contain such elements, and its opening exposed researchers to risks they were unprepared to recognise. What followed inside the burial chamber was a slow environmental collapse that, extended far beyond the initial excavation period. Once opened, the tomb's interior climate shifted permanently, allowing moisture from human breath and outside air to condense on ancient surfaces. This change encouraged microbial growth on walls, paintings, and organic materials that had remained stable for centuries. Modern conservation studies later identified bacterial colonies forming inside the chamber, forcing authorities to limit access and install climate controls. The sealed space had functioned as a controlled ecosystem, and its opening transformed preservation into an ongoing battle against irreversible decay. Physical deterioration followed just as swiftly. Objects preserved for millennia began to decay within weeks of exposure. Wood warped, textiles became brittle, and pigments faded under artificial light. Conservation methods were still in their infancy, and mistakes made during the initial excavation could not be reversed. The sealed burial chamber had protected its contents through isolation, and opening it ensured that preservation would now be a constant struggle against time rather than a passive condition. Tutankhamun's remains themselves became subjects of repeated examination. Early autopsies, later X-rays, and eventually CT scans revealed fractures, congenital conditions, and signs of illness. Each investigation required further disturbance of the mummy, unwrapping layers placed with ritual intent. While these studies expanded historical understanding, they also transformed the burial chamber from a sacred enclosure into a site of ongoing intrusion. The king's body, once sealed away from the world, became an object of perpetual scrutiny. The opening of Tutankhamun's burial chamber also ignited ethical debates that continue to shape archaeology today. Even in the 1920s, some scholars questioned whether a sealed royal tomb should be breached at all, especially one so clearly intact. Critics argued that the chamber's purpose was spiritual rather than historical, designed to ensure eternal rest rather than provide knowledge. Over time, Tutankhamun's tomb became a case study in the cost of discovery, forcing researchers to confront whether documentation and display justify the permanent violation of spaces intentionally sealed by ancient cultures. The modest scale of the burial chamber continues to trouble researchers. Unlike other pharaohs' tombs, it appears to have been adapted hastily, possibly due to Tutankhamun's sudden death. Some scholars believe the chamber was never meant for a king at all, reinforcing the idea that its sealing was final rather than provisional. Its narrow dimensions, combined with the density of burial goods, give the impression of a space closed in urgency and never intended to accommodate prolonged human presence again. Over time, the burial chamber became less a place of rest than a symbol of transgression. The narrative of curses and consequences persisted not because of superstition alone, but because the evidence of damage was undeniable. Deaths, illness, decay, and loss followed the opening in tangible ways. The sealed chamber had functioned perfectly for centuries. Only after it was opened did problems emerge, reinforcing the unsettling notion that it had fulfilled its purpose precisely by remaining closed. Today, Tutankhamun's burial chamber is heavily regulated, and access is restricted to limit further damage. Many of its treasures are displayed in museums, divorced from the environment that once preserved them. Yet the chamber itself remains altered forever. Its silence was broken, its balance destroyed, and its intended function erased the moment the seals were cut, leaving behind a lingering sense that some ancient spaces were sealed not to be discovered but to be left alone. The chamber gave up its secrets, but it also left behind the quiet certainty that its sealing was never meant to be undone. The airtight tomb of Pakal the Great. Emerging from the dense canopy of Chiapas, the Temple of the Inscriptions conceals more than stone and ruin, hiding a chamber that has lain untouched since the reign of Kinich Jana Pakal. Palenque itself is a city of contrasts, vibrant vegetation overtaking ceremonial plazas, while massive limestone blocks rise to mark sacred spaces. Beneath this monumental temple, an ancient stairway disappears into darkness, its existence unnoticed until the mid-20th century. Scholars understood that the chamber was purposefully sealed, yet the full implications of opening it would only become clear as the stone barriers were disturbed. Every layer of rubble above the stairway suggested intentional concealment and a silence maintained for centuries. Beneath layers of rubble and centuries of sediment, the stairway leading to the tomb was carefully blocked, as though the ancient builders had sought to erase all memory of its presence. Excavation in 1952 revealed a pathway filled with loose stone and debris, yet no signs of casual obstruction. Every piece seemed deliberately placed to prevent entry. Archaeologists noted that, unlike other Maya tombs which had often been looted in antiquity, this corridor had been meticulously filled and hidden, ensuring the chamber beyond remained sealed. The act of uncovering it was therefore not merely archaeological work, but a direct violation of an ancient intentional closure. The walls of the chamber fit together with astonishing precision, each limestone block shaped to exclude air and maintain the isolation the Maya intended for the king's remains. Measurements later confirmed that the tomb functioned almost as a self-contained system. Even minor openings would disturb the equilibrium carefully preserved over more than 13 centuries. The placement of stones, the tight joints, and the overall geometry suggested forethought and engineering designed to resist intrusion, as if the builders had anticipated a future in which curious hands might attempt entry. The seal itself became a statement, a quiet warning about the sanctity of the space it enclosed. Descending the narrow, dust-choked stairwell, researchers were struck by the weight of silence, the air thick with centuries of stillness and the faint, lingering scent of resin. Unlike other tombs that had been looted or exposed, this space felt almost alive with containment. Each step disturbed air untouched by human breath for generations. The darkness seemed to press in from every side, amplifying the sensation that the chamber had been intended as a final, isolated environment. No treasures glittered in the corridor, only the oppressive stillness of an enclosure designed to resist curiosity and delay time itself. At the chamber's centre, a massive sarcophagus carved from a single block of limestone dominated the space, its lid etched with images that had never been meant for human eyes. Scholars later studied the reliefs carefully. Pakal is depicted in a cosmic journey, framed by intricate patterns representing life, death, and regeneration. The lid's weight alone acted as a physical seal, and every symbolic element reinforced the ritual isolation of the king. Here, the tomb's design moved beyond mere preservation. It was a visual and spiritual boundary intended to separate the deceased from the living world entirely. Inside, traces of cinnabar-coated surfaces, a toxic mercury-based pigment that had preserved objects while simultaneously containing hazards that would confront anyone who entered. Researchers noted that the pigment adhered to wooden surfaces and organic materials, creating a protective layer that also carried chemical risk. Exposure to air and handling by archaeologists released fine particles that could be inhaled, posing subtle but real dangers. The chamber had been a controlled environment in every sense, and opening it disrupted the chemical equilibrium that had maintained centuries of preservation, illustrating the hidden perils of disturbing a sealed tomb. As the tomb was breached, subtle shifts in humidity and temperature began to affect the walls, floors, and fragile organic remains, turning a once stable environment into one of ongoing decay. Scholars documented the immediate deterioration of textiles and wooden objects, their condition previously protected by the sealed air. Even the limestone walls began to respond to changes in moisture, showing early signs of mineral efflorescence. The airtight environment that had preserved the king's tomb was destroyed not with violence, but by mere presence and exposure, revealing how the tomb's integrity relied entirely on continued isolation. The king's body rested within carefully wrapped layers of cloth and ritual deposits, its placement reflecting centuries-old beliefs about death, rebirth, and the sanctity of separation from the living. Each layer had been arranged to preserve the body ritually and to support Pakal's journey into the afterlife, leaving little margin for human interference. Researchers handling the remains were acutely aware of the tension between the desire to study the king and the violation of his intended rest. The intrusion was not merely physical, it was a disruption of an elaborate spiritual and ritual system, a crossing of boundaries carefully constructed by his culture. Carvings on the sarcophagus lid depicted celestial journeys, while glyphs along the walls hinted at cosmological order, reinforcing that the chamber's ceiling carried symbolic significance beyond preservation alone. The imagery of stars, serpents, and the world tree suggested a connection to the heavens, and the precise arrangement of objects within the tomb reflected an understanding of sacred space. Every element, the placement of the king, the orientation of the tomb, and the sealing methods, worked together to create a system meant to remain untouched. Researchers realised that opening the tomb was not only a physical act but a symbolic intrusion into a carefully constructed worldview. Scholars debated whether it was right to enter a tomb so clearly sealed, balancing the pursuit of knowledge against the risk of violating the spiritual and physical integrity the Maya had intended. Some argued that understanding Pakal's reign and material culture justified the breach, while others cautioned that ethical considerations should govern the study of spaces designed for eternity. The debate extended beyond mere academic discourse, raising questions about whether modern curiosity could ever reconcile with the deliberate finality of ancient ritual practice. In the shadows of the tomb, every decision to study, measure, or photograph felt like a further encroachment. Every hour of human presence altered the chamber, introducing moisture, microorganisms, and light that the sealed tomb had never known, irrevocably transforming a space once stable for over a millennium. Researchers realized that the tomb's equilibrium was fragile, and that every artifact exposed to air became vulnerable to decay. Conservation techniques had to be improvised, yet even with careful handling, the tomb's interior could never be returned to its original state. The sealed environment that had maintained Pakal's tomb for centuries now existed only in memory, a system permanently breached by human interference. The effort to reach the tomb's depths revealed more than artifacts. It exposed a deliberate intention of closure, a boundary crafted to remain unbroken, as if the Maya foresaw the consequences of human intrusion. Scholars understood that every layer of stone, pigment, and object had been deliberately arranged to maintain a finality now compromised. The tomb itself seemed to insist on its isolation, and yet the presence of modern observers ensured that this boundary could never be restored. The space had surrendered its contents, but not its quiet, enduring warning. Even after decades of study and conservation, the tomb of Pakal the Great remains a space marked by tension between preservation and intrusion, its secrets partially revealed yet eternally protected by the choices of those who built it. The jungle continues to reclaim the temple above, a silent reminder that beneath the limestone and glyphs, the king's chamber was meant to endure undisturbed, and the act of opening it cannot be undone. The tomb yielded its silence, yet every carefully placed stone and sealed joint still seemed to warn that it was never meant to welcome living eyes. The Red Queen's mercury-sealed tomb. The Red Queen's tomb remained untouched for centuries, her presence known only through whispers of ritual and the faint gleam of mercury that coated the chamber's hidden walls. Temple 13. At Palenque had long been a quiet sentinel over the city, its architecture concealing passageways that had escaped both looters and casual explorers. Within the sealed tomb, mercury clung to surfaces in a thin, almost imperceptible layer, suggesting the Maya employed it deliberately, not only as a preservative but as a boundary between the living and the dead. Every element of the tomb, from the arrangement of artifacts to the chemical atmosphere, pointed to a space designed to remain inviolate. When archaeologists uncovered the stone barrier in 2012, they realized the tomb had been deliberately blocked and compacted, preserving its contents from any intrusion for over a millennium. The stairway leading to the chamber had been backfilled and sealed with layers of stone and mortar, demonstrating an understanding of both durability and ritual sanctity. The care taken to obscure the entrance suggested an expectation that the tomb should never be opened again, a conclusion reinforced by the absence of disturbance and the pristine preservation of the interior. Every step of excavation required extreme caution, as the act of opening risked altering a space that had been meticulously insulated. Mercury coated the surfaces inside, changing the very air, evidence of an unusual preservation technique whose purpose balanced between ritual and chemical stability. Analysis revealed unusually high concentrations of the element, which likely prevented decay of organic materials and deterred microbial activity. At the same time, the mercury created a subtle hazard for anyone entering the chamber, making every breath and touch a calculated risk. This duality, protection and danger, defined the tomb, suggesting that the Maya had intentionally created an environment both sacred and potentially lethal to intruders. Stepping past the threshold, researchers were confronted by the faint metallic scent and the oppressive quiet, a sealed microcosm where centuries of isolation had left the air heavy and still. The narrow chamber absorbed sound, amplifying the sensation of intrusion as if the tomb itself were aware of being opened. Dust motes floated in the thin shafts of light from portable lamps, suspended in the mercury-laden air, and the walls appeared to pulse subtly with age and chemical accumulation. Every detail reinforced the notion that this was not merely a repository for the dead, but a deliberate, enclosed ritual space. At the heart of the chamber lay the Red Queen's sarcophagus, her skeletal remains wrapped meticulously, accompanied by carefully positioned offerings that suggested a complex funerary protocol. The sarcophagus, carved from dense limestone, bore no inscriptions naming the Queen but was surrounded by objects indicating high status. Jade beads, ceremonial vessels, and ornaments arranged with exacting precision. The positioning of the body, the orientation of limbs, and the placement of grave goods suggested an awareness of cosmological symbolism, as though the Queen's final journey into the afterlife had been choreographed to align with celestial patterns. The mercury that had coated the tomb preserved organic material with remarkable effectiveness, yet the same element posed a quiet threat to anyone who dared disturb the sealed chamber. Fragile textiles, wooden objects, and even skeletal remains were encased in a protective layer of the toxic substance, preventing decay while introducing a subtle hazard. Researchers had to navigate the tomb carefully, balancing the desire to document and study the contents with the necessity of avoiding contamination or inhalation. In this way, the very substance that ensured preservation simultaneously demanded respect and caution, emphasizing the chamber's deliberate design. Jade ornaments, ceramic vessels, and ceremonial objects surrounded the sarcophagus in deliberate arrangement, each item reinforcing the notion that this was a sacred, impervious space. Every artifact bore signs of intentional placement. Symmetry, orientation, and relative spacing suggested that disturbance could disrupt both the physical and spiritual integrity of the tomb. These objects were not randomly deposited but part of a calculated ritual system, reflecting a broader cultural emphasis on cosmology, death, and the maintenance of spiritual order. Human intrusion risked collapsing a centuries-old equilibrium crafted with meticulous care. Once opened, the chamber began to react to human presence. Mercury's exposure to air shifted the chemical balance and introduced a potential for microbial change that had been dormant for centuries. Fragile textiles and wooden artifacts showed signs of immediate response to humidity and oxygen, revealing how delicate the internal environment had been. Even minor disturbances, adjusting a lamp or moving a tool, could accelerate decay in ways the ancient builders had carefully avoided. In this sense, the tomb functioned like a sealed laboratory, one whose equilibrium was easily disrupted by curiosity. Every detail, from the Queen's positioning to the placement of grave goods, reflected deliberate cosmological design, revealing that sealing the tomb was as much spiritual as it was practical. The arrangement of objects, combined with the mercury layer, suggested the Maya intended a complete barrier between the living and the dead, both in terms of physical intrusion and metaphysical disturbance. The tomb was a microcosm of ritual belief, constructed to remain untouched and to protect the Queen's passage into the afterlife. Opening it, therefore, was an act that traversed practical, spiritual, and ethical boundaries. Subsequent studies, CT scans, chemical assays, and DNA analysis illuminated what had long been hidden, though every new measurement required further intrusion into the once isolated tomb. Each scan revealed structural details and anomalies, providing unprecedented insight into Maya funerary practices while simultaneously exposing the tomb's contents to light, air, and human presence. Scientific investigation became a double-edged pursuit. Knowledge came at the cost of disturbing a chamber deliberately sealed and chemically maintained, reinforcing the tension between research and preservation. The chamber's intrusion prompted debate over whether the pursuit of knowledge justified disturbing a space so clearly designed to remain untouched, raising questions that extend beyond archaeology into morality. Scholars discussed the ethical implications of exposing the mercury, rearranging artifacts for documentation, and potentially compromising the Queen's intended rest. These debates highlighted the enduring challenge of balancing human curiosity with respect for ritual intent and the consequences of altering systems designed for isolation. The Red Queen's tomb became a focal point for the philosophical as well as the scientific. Opening the tomb altered its delicate environment, irreversibly transforming the chamber's chemistry, its artifacts, and the centuries-old equilibrium that had preserved the Queen's remains. Mercury levels shifted, microclimates changed, and objects once sealed in stable conditions were now vulnerable. The tomb that had existed in perfect isolation for over a millennium became a managed space, requiring constant monitoring and intervention to prevent further degradation. Human presence had permanently rewritten the rules of preservation, illustrating that some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be restored. The Red Queen endures beneath layers of mercury and stone, her tomb a silent testament to the dangers of breaching what was never meant for human hands. The Serapeum of Saqqara's granite vaults. The granite corridors of the Serapeum were designed to confound and awe, their colossal blocks and precise alignment reflecting a sacred purpose that forbade intrusion for centuries. Each passage, meticulously carved and reinforced, suggested that human hands were never meant to traverse the full extent of this underground labyrinth. The tombs contained the remains of the Apis bulls, animals venerated as intermediaries between gods and humans, whose resting places were treated with ritual precision. The combination of scale, material, and intentional isolation created an environment that was both architectural marvel and spiritual sanctuary, a space where the weight of stone reinforced the weight of belief. Auguste Mariette's 19th century excavation unveiled the first sealed chambers, revealing a subterranean network that had eluded looters and remained untouched for generations. Carefully descending into the corridors, Mariette and his team documented the first of the massive sarcophagi, noting the precise way each had been positioned within its vault. They discovered narrow passageways and intersections designed to protect the integrity of the chambers, with packed stone barriers that suggested the builders anticipated the tombs would be examined far in the future. Even at the point of first discovery, it was clear that these were not ordinary burial spaces. The architecture itself conveyed ritual significance, demanding both respect and caution. Moving and positioning sarcophagi carved from single blocks of granite required ingenuity, labour, and planning that continues to baffle modern engineers. Estimates suggest that some of these sarcophagi weighed upwards of 20 tons, and yet they were manoeuvred into precise positions deep within narrow tunnels. The logistics of lifting, sliding, and positioning such enormous objects using only ancient tools are still debated by archaeologists and engineers alike. Every angle and alignment of the granite seems deliberate, designed not only to house sacred remains, but also to communicate the grandeur and permanence of the burial practice. The construction itself remains a testament to both technical skill and ritual devotion. The ancient builders employed stone doors and reinforced passages to seal the vaults, creating a series of barriers meant to isolate the sacred bulls from human hands indefinitely. Each doorway was carefully fitted, leaving no gaps, and often backed with rubble to ensure stability. This was more than practical construction. It was a deliberate method of enclosure, an architectural vow that the chambers would remain untouched for centuries. Even with modern equipment, archaeologists have noted that the precise fit and weight of the stones make manipulation difficult, underlining the builder's intention that the tombs stay sealed. Each sarcophagus dwarfed a human figure, its inscriptions and proportions emphasizing the sacred importance of the Apis bulls interred within, intended to command reverence and awe. Carvings along the granite depicted ritual formulas and protective symbols, and their scale seemed designed to impress upon the observer the weight of spiritual responsibility. The careful arrangement of the sarcophagi within each chamber reinforced a hierarchical and symbolic order, ensuring that the bull's remains were not only preserved, but also honoured in accordance with ancient belief. These monumental stone coffins are enduring evidence of the lengths the Egyptians went to safeguard both the animals and their spiritual significance. Mummified bulls and carefully arranged ceremonial objects lay undisturbed, preserved by isolation and the deliberate inaccessibility of the vaults. Artifacts such as ritual vessels, amulets, and offerings were placed around the sarcophagi with meticulous care, suggesting the entirety of the tomb functioned as a sacred ecosystem. The lack of disturbance over millennia attests to the effectiveness of the builders' sealing techniques. Each chamber, untouched and silent, carried an aura of deliberate preservation, its stillness interrupted only by the careful footsteps of modern researchers who risked exposure to confined spaces and fragile materials. The tunnel's expansive dimensions and precise construction underscore the ancient architect's skill, leaving modern observers to speculate about the techniques and labour employed. Some corridors stretch for dozens of metres, their ceilings supported by monolithic blocks, creating a sense of weight and scale that both awes and intimidates. The spatial planning suggests an understanding not only of physical engineering, but also of symbolic geography, with the placement of each sarcophagus reflecting cosmological or ceremonial intent. Archaeologists continue to debate the methods by which these chambers were constructed and sealed, as much of the process remains a technical enigma. Excavation required careful navigation of narrow passages, immense stone weight, and fragile walls, reinforcing the sense that these chambers were not meant for repeated human entry. Even minor missteps could dislodge stones or damage sarcophagi, so each action demanded precision and patience. The conditions amplified the chamber's sense of sanctity. It was impossible to ignore that these corridors had been constructed to remain off-limits. Modern researchers often describe a combination of awe and apprehension when working within the Serapeum, as every movement carries the weight of centuries of human intent and the silent presence of sacred remains. While some sarcophagi and remains remained remarkably intact, subtle cracks and seepage reveal the delicate balance the ancient builders had sought to maintain. Moisture entering through fissures had caused minor damage to some organic remains, yet the majority of materials survived remarkably well due to the vault's original isolation. This juxtaposition of preservation and decay emphasizes the chamber's vulnerability once exposed, highlighting the foresight of the builders who sealed the tombs so effectively. The architecture itself served as both guardian and preserver, a testament to an ancient understanding of long-term stability. The carvings and hieroglyphs record rituals, dates, and devotion, emphasizing that sealing these vaults was as much a religious act as it was a practical one. Symbols etched into granite detail ceremonies, divine associations, and the sacred role of the Apis bulls within the Egyptian cosmology. The inscriptions imply that the vaults were not intended for human observation, but for the continuation of ritual power across centuries, reinforcing the tension between reverence and discovery. Researchers entering the chambers are confronted not only with physical enormity, but with the weight of a tradition designed to resist human interference. Non-invasive techniques such as 3D scanning and structural imaging revealed details of the vaults without disturbing them, illustrating the tension between research and preservation. These methods allow scholars to document inscriptions, measure sarcophagi, and study the spatial layout while leaving the physical environment largely undisturbed. Even so, each interaction carries the risk of disrupting a sealed equilibrium that had persisted for thousands of years. The Serapeum thus stands as a monument to both ancient ingenuity and the ethical considerations that govern modern archaeology. The Serapeum prompts reflection on human curiosity and respect for design, demonstrating how these vaults were intended to endure beyond the reach of those who might enter. Each chamber, corridor, and sarcophagus exemplifies a conscious decision to create permanence and mystery, to enclose the sacred in ways that resist intrusion. Archaeologists must reconcile the desire for knowledge with the awareness that some spaces were deliberately constructed to remain untouched, their secrets preserved in stone and silence. Massive granite vaults of the Serapeum hold their ground, their weight and precision guarding the sacred bulls as a reminder that some chambers were never meant to be disturbed. The Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria. The Black Sarcophagus emerged from the depths of Alexandria's necropolis, its sheer darkness and weight immediately drawing attention and unease among the team of archaeologists. Unlike other tombs, its massive lid exuded a sense of permanence, as if the stone itself resisted intrusion. Its discovery in 2018 ignited both excitement and caution, for centuries of legend and rumour had accompanied this enigmatic artefact, hinting at secrets the ancients intended to shield from the living. Even before any attempt at opening, the sarcophagus's presence imposed a quiet authority, demanding measured observation and respect for the forces that had kept it sealed for so long. Careful removal of centuries of accumulated rubble revealed the sarcophagus's precisely fitted lid, suggesting the ancients had gone to extraordinary lengths to secure its contents. Each block surrounding the tomb had been methodically arranged, leaving no gaps large enough for casual entry. Archaeologists documented every angle, photographically and in sketches, recognizing that premature disturbance could compromise both structure and historical record. The labour-intensive excavation underscored the deliberate nature of the chamber's concealment, making it clear that the builders had anticipated future human interaction and sought to deter it with calculated precision. Its black granite surface was mottled with greenish stains and subtle veins, while inscriptions etched along its edges hinted at both funerary purpose and deliberate secrecy. Scholars identified Greek and Egyptian characters intertwined, pointing to a Hellenistic influence, possibly Ptolemaic, during a period of cultural fusion in Alexandria. The stone's colour, near impenetrable in shadowed corridors, amplified the sense of foreboding and awe, while its physical heft communicated a permanence that ordinary tombs could not convey. Each visible mark, each carved symbol reinforced the sarcophagus's role as a repository of both ritual and warning. Stone wedges and traces of resin confirmed that the sarcophagus had been sealed with intention, designed to endure both time and human curiosity alike. The ancient craftsmen employed a combination of mechanical and chemical techniques to ensure the lid remained immovable, with tight joins preventing prying and resin acting as both adhesive and preservative. Such measures illustrated not only technical skill but a cultural imperative. The tomb's contents were not meant for casual inspection, and the seal itself carried meaning, a symbolic boundary separating life from death, the living from the unknown. Archaeologists employed hydraulic lifts, measured prying, and constant documentation to carefully breach the lid, aware that sudden exposure could compromise fragile interior contents. Every movement was recorded, and environmental conditions were closely monitored to prevent shock to the enclosed atmosphere. The lifting of the lid was both physical and psychological. For those present, it was a tangible confrontation with centuries of human intent, a moment when caution, curiosity, and historical responsibility intersected. Upon lifting the massive stone, a faint metallic scent and a darkness deeper than expected seemed to absorb light, creating an atmosphere that unsettled even experienced researchers. The interior seemed to resist illumination, its shadows thick and impenetrable, as though the stone itself guarded the objects within. The combination of visual obscurity and olfactory cues heightened tension, making every observation feel charged with significance. The sarcophagus, long silent, now confronted human senses directly, emphasizing that even centuries of sealing could not fully mute its presence. Human remains and scattered objects filled the chamber, partially submerged in liquid, their arrangement suggesting careful placement long before modern eyes ever saw them. Some bones were fragmented, yet appeared deliberately positioned. Artifacts were clustered with what seemed ritualistic intention. The liquid, dark and viscous, may have been part of preservation or ceremonial practice, its chemical composition analysed by researchers to understand both its origin and effect on the sarcophagus's interior environment. Every detail reinforced that the contents had been deliberately curated, and that human interference had been meticulously anticipated and delayed. The artifacts reacted subtly to air and light. Some metals darkened, organic matter shifted, and researchers observed that even minor disturbance seemed to accelerate transformation. These reactions were documented scientifically, with careful measurement of temperature, humidity, and exposure time. Observers noted the chamber's interior had functioned as a sealed microenvironment, protecting its contents from decay and contamination for centuries. The contrast between centuries of stability and the vulnerability of sudden exposure underscored the deliberate nature of the tomb's sealing and the foresight of those who designed it. Microscopic analysis of residues inside the sarcophagus revealed traces of metals and organic compounds that hinted at previously unknown embalming techniques, suggesting the ancients experimented with preservation methods far more sophisticated than traditionally documented. Researchers identified elements such as mercury compounds, unusual salts, and organic oils that would have contributed to slowing decomposition, a practice potentially intended to maintain both physical form and ritual integrity over centuries. These findings provide a rare glimpse into funerary innovation during Alexandria's Hellenistic period and hint at specialized knowledge of chemistry or alchemy among the tomb's designers. The presence of these substances also raises questions about why the chamber was sealed so meticulously, as even slight exposure to air could disrupt these delicate materials, implying that the ancients understood the vulnerability of their preservation methods. Dating and inscriptions indicated Hellenistic or early Roman origin, aligning the tomb with Alexandria's rich funerary traditions and hinting at reasons why the chamber was deliberately concealed. The inscriptions referenced deities and rituals, blending Egyptian and Greek religious motifs, and suggested that secrecy was integral to the ritual, perhaps to safeguard spiritual potency or prevent desecration. The combination of historical context and physical evidence conveyed a deliberate layering of protection, belief, and cultural symbolism, indicating that the sarcophagus had been conceived as both tomb and enigma. Exposure created immediate conservation concerns, as the once sealed environment had prevented decay, and air, humidity, and handling now posed delicate threats. Specialists carefully stabilized the interior, controlling light, temperature, and moisture, understanding that centuries of protection could be undone in moments. The sarcophagus's fragility highlighted the ethical dimension of archaeological exploration. The pursuit of knowledge was inseparable from the responsibility to preserve, to respect both the physical artifact and the ancient intent behind its concealment. Examinations of the sarcophagus revealed how ancient sealing practices balanced reverence and protection, preserving objects while warning intruders that disturbance carried consequences. Scholars interpreted inscriptions, positioning of objects, and the structural integrity of the lid as communicating both practical and symbolic caution. The black sarcophagus thus exemplifies the dual nature of burial practices, as preservation for the afterlife and as a challenge to the living, a reminder that some knowledge was guarded by both stone and ritual. The act of opening highlighted the eternal tension between curiosity and respect, illustrating that some tombs were deliberately designed to remain beyond human reach. The black sarcophagus embodies a convergence of historical ingenuity, ritual precision, and human fascination, compelling those who study it to navigate the fine line between understanding and intrusion. Its legacy lies not only in what is inside, but in the questions it leaves unanswered, preserving a shadow of mystery for every future observer. The black sarcophagus of Alexandria persists as both tomb and enigma, its dark stone a barrier between the living and secrets long meant to be hidden. The tomb of the Griffin warrior. Archaeologists first encountered the Griffin warrior tomb when stone fragments and intact grave goods hinted at a chamber untouched for over 3,000 years. The discovery in 2015 near Pylos, Greece, immediately marked it as extraordinary, offering a glimpse into a Bronze Age elite burial, preserved far beyond expectation. Even before the excavation began, researchers sensed that this tomb held a remarkable confluence of wealth, craftsmanship, and ritual care, demanding both meticulous attention and profound respect. The artifacts visible through minor fissures suggested a high-ranking individual, and anticipation built around what secrets lay hidden beneath the carefully sealed surfaces. Fragile soil layers and densely packed artifacts demanded painstaking removal, each movement measured to prevent inadvertent damage to the skeleton or objects. Archaeologists employed fine brushes, soft trowels, and small tools to navigate the delicate matrix of earth, aware that a single misstep could compromise centuries of preservation. Every fragment of debris was documented, photographed, and mapped, creating a comprehensive record before even the smallest object was touched. The excavation process became an intricate choreography, blending patience, precision, and constant observation, revealing a space where both human history and the earth itself held secrets in delicate balance. A rectangular layout appeared within the tomb, with clusters of bronze, gold, and ceramic items deliberately arranged around the central burial space. The placement of artifacts appeared intentional, with weapons, jewelry, and daily objects each occupying specific niches that likely reflected both ritual significance and social hierarchy. Narrow pathways between clusters of grave goods suggested that the original builders considered the tomb's internal navigation, perhaps to allow symbolic interaction with the deceased or to maintain visual coherence. Even the simplest vessels and fragments of pottery contributed to a sense of carefully orchestrated presentation, demonstrating that the tomb was more than a container. It was a narrative in stone and artifact. The skeleton lay supine with limbs positioned ceremoniously, indicating a high-status individual whose interment reflected both ritual significance and social hierarchy. Examination of the bones revealed signs of robust physical activity and trauma, consistent with combat or military involvement, confirming the grave's association with power and leadership. Subtle features of the burial posture, including the positioning of hands and head, suggested ceremonial considerations, possibly invoking protection or guidance in the afterlife. In this arrangement, researchers saw a fusion of personal identity, societal role, and ritualized care that had been preserved intact for millennia. Bronze swords, daggers, and intricately forged armor surrounded the body, their precision suggesting mastery of metallurgy and symbolic authority. Each piece bore traces of craftsmanship so refined that it indicated workshops of considerable skill and status, while ornamentation suggested that these objects were not solely functional but carried ceremonial significance. The arrangement emphasized hierarchy and power, with weapons positioned to signify rank and martial prowess. Researchers noted that metal preservation had been aided by the tomb's microclimate, and even minor exposure required careful management to avoid corrosion or damage. Gold, silver, and faience ornaments were carefully positioned near the skeleton, including engraved signet rings and decorative seals revealing connections to wider Aegean networks. These items demonstrated both personal adornment and markers of influence, connecting the Griffin warrior to trade, political alliances, and cultural exchange across the Mediterranean. Decorative patterns and motifs illustrated symbolic literacy, reflecting beliefs and identity while highlighting technical skill in working with precious metals. The careful arrangement suggested an intention to convey prestige, authority, and perhaps even spiritual protection to accompany the deceased. Ceramic vessels, drinking cups, and small utilitarian objects appeared deliberately placed, reflecting aspects of ritual, status, and daily life in elite society. Some vessels bore intricate designs, while others remained plain, their function seemingly mundane yet integral to funerary ritual. Scholars interpreted their presence as indicators of offerings or symbolic sustenance for the afterlife. Together, the pottery and functional items frame the tomb not as a chaotic repository, but as a meticulously curated environment, where every object contributed to the story of the Griffin warrior and the culture that honoured him. Seals and carvings bore motifs of griffins and mythological creatures, providing insight into Bronze Age beliefs, symbolic storytelling, and artistic conventions. The imagery blended local Mycenaean iconography with influences from Minoan Crete and the broader Aegean, suggesting a cultural milieu receptive to cross-regional ideas. Griffins, often associated with protection or divine guardianship, may have symbolically reinforced the tomb's purpose, warning intruders while honouring the deceased. Each artistic element added layers of meaning, creating a visual language that complemented the physical artifacts and guided interpretation of the burial's social and spiritual significance. Study of the Griffin warrior's seal impressions revealed intricate depictions of animals, chariots, and ritual scenes, offering a rare glimpse into the administrative and ceremonial practices of Bronze Age Pylos. Researchers studied these seals with magnification and 3D imaging, uncovering details that connected the tomb occupant to broader political and religious networks. The iconography suggested not only personal authority, but also participation in ceremonies that reinforced social hierarchy and possibly contact with Minoan Crete. These findings illuminate aspects of governance, trade, and belief systems previously unknown, showing that the Griffin warrior's role extended beyond the tomb into the societal and ritual fabric of his time. The seals, therefore, functioned as both symbolic and practical markers of identity, giving voice to a culture preserved only in fragments. Fragments of leather, textiles, and other perishable items survived the millennia, offering rare glimpses into ceremonial garments, armour, and personal belongings. Despite centuries of burial, these organic materials retained enough structure to allow analysis of weaving techniques, dye use, and material sourcing. The preservation revealed the Griffin warrior's wardrobe as both functional and symbolic, illustrating the integration of clothing, armour, and identity. Scientific examination illuminated the technological capabilities of the period and provided a window into daily life, status, and ceremonial expression long absent from the material record of other contemporaneous tombs. The assemblage illustrated social hierarchy, political influence, and funerary practice, allowing researchers to reconstruct aspects of elite Mycenaean life. Grave goods, placement, and preservation indicated that the tomb was a deliberate statement of authority, blending material wealth with cultural and ritual knowledge. Comparison with other regional burials revealed both common traditions and unique deviations, suggesting the Griffin warrior occupied a particularly significant role within the socio-political landscape of Pylos. In this context, the tomb functioned as both personal memorial and broader societal testament. Opening a long-sealed tomb required a delicate balance between careful exploration and conservation, as even minor exposure could alter the preservation of artifacts. Archaeologists had to monitor humidity, temperature, and handling continuously, ensuring that the centuries of protection were not inadvertently compromised. Equipment and techniques were adapted dynamically, guided by observation and prior experience, highlighting the practical challenges of modern intervention in ancient chambers. These precautions underscored the ethical responsibility inherent in archaeology, blending curiosity with stewardship to honour both history and context. Despite careful excavation, the tomb continues to provoke questions about identity, ritual behaviour, and the broader context of Bronze Age society. Artifacts hint at unrecorded alliances, unknown ceremonies, and regional interactions, leaving researchers to interpret meaning from fragmentary evidence. The spatial arrangement, combination of organic and metal objects, and symbolic imagery all suggest stories that remain partially obscured, resisting simple explanations. The Griffin warrior tomb stands as a complex puzzle, offering insight while preserving uncertainty, compelling continued investigation and reflection on the nature of secrecy, power, and remembrance in the ancient world. Time has not yet revealed the full story of the Griffin warrior, leaving his treasures to whisper secrets of a world lost to memory. The Oseberg Viking Ship Burial Chamber. The Oseberg ship exemplified Viking burial art, its timbers and internal arrangement reflecting ritual precision and social hierarchy. This 9th century vessel, found in Vestfold, Norway, stood as one of the most elaborately furnished burials ever discovered from the Viking Age. The ship itself was not merely a container for the deceased, it functioned as a ceremonial space, carefully curated with artifacts, textiles, and organic remains that conveyed status, identity, and spiritual symbolism. The combination of craftsmanship, preserved materials, and careful arrangement suggested a society that intertwined everyday life with ritualized death, leaving behind a chamber that would challenge researchers for generations. Delicate soil and waterlogged wood required careful techniques to stabilize artifacts while revealing the chamber's original configuration. Archaeologists used an array of fine tools, supports, and documentation methods to navigate the fragile environment where even slight pressure could cause irreparable damage. Layers of earth were removed in measured stages, each segment photographed and mapped, ensuring that the spatial relationship between objects and the ship's structure remained intact. The waterlogged preservation conditions, while a challenge, also served as a safeguard for organic materials, allowing researchers to study textiles, wood, and leather in ways that rarely survive centuries of burial. Intricate carvings, iron rivets, and expertly joined planks demonstrated a union of practical craftsmanship and ceremonial symbolism. The ship's construction revealed the duality of Viking engineering, functional seaworthiness paired with artistry intended to convey power and prestige. Carvings of intertwined animals and serpents adorned the sides, while geometric patterns reinforced aesthetic and symbolic coherence. The vessel's long, narrow shape facilitated burial within the mound, but the detailed attention to decoration reflected cultural priorities, suggesting that the ship was as much a ritual object as a means of conveyance to the afterlife. 2 women lay within the chamber, skeletal analysis revealing their age, health, and social prominence within Viking society. Both were carefully positioned, their bodies oriented with consideration for the ship's interior arrangement. Examination of bones suggested differences in diet, activity, and possibly social function, raising questions about their roles in the elite hierarchy. Whether leaders, ritual specialists, or symbolic figures, the women's placement emphasized intentionality and ceremony, providing insight into how Viking society merged personal identity, status, and belief within burial practices. Preserved fabrics, wooden furniture, and leather items offered insights into ceremonial attire, domestic culture, and elite burial practices. Layers of woven wool and linen retained traces of dye and stitching, revealing clothing styles and craftsmanship that rarely survive elsewhere. Wooden chests, beds, and benches were positioned within the chamber, demonstrating both functional and symbolic roles in the funerary setting. Leather straps, shoes, and belts survived in remarkable condition, allowing researchers to reconstruct the object's original form and use. These materials illustrated the care and resources devoted to the burial, reflecting the intertwined practical and ceremonial life of Viking elites. Household goods and ritual implements illustrated the interplay of daily life and symbolic performance in Viking funerary tradition. Items such as carts, cooking implements, and serving vessels accompanied the deceased, suggesting that the ship functioned as a miniature domestic and ritual environment. The careful selection and placement of objects implied both practical provision for the afterlife and the staging of status, wealth, and power. Researchers noted that each object contributed to a broader narrative, offering a composite view of life, death, and the social framework of the Viking elite. Traces of perfumes, herbs, and organic compounds were revealed through microscopic analysis of the burial artifacts, suggesting ritualized sensory experiences accompanied the interment. Researchers detected plant oils and resins that may have been applied to textiles, wood, and containers, indicating that scent played a deliberate role in the funerary rites. The presence of these substances points to ceremonial practices designed to evoke spiritual or symbolic meaning, perhaps intended to honor the deceased, purify the space, or facilitate transition to the afterlife. Such findings highlight the complexity of Viking ritual, showing that the Oseberg burial was not only visually elaborate but also multisensory, with layers of meaning embedded in both material culture and ephemeral substances. Horses and dogs, carefully placed within the burial, suggested sacrificial and symbolic roles tied to status, ritual, and myth. The animal remains appeared deliberate, their positions complementing human interments and ritual objects. Veterinary and isotopic analysis provided insight into diet, health, and treatment, reinforcing interpretations of ritualized inclusion. These companions symbolized status and spiritual belief, indicating that the burial reflected more than a single individual's life. It illustrated interconnected layers of societal and spiritual meaning. Intertwined beasts, serpents, and geometric patterns carved into wooden objects conveyed mythological narratives and cultural values. The decorative motifs aligned with known Viking cosmology, suggesting themes of protection, power, and continuity. Some carvings depicted scenes that could reference legendary deeds or divine associations, offering researchers interpretive avenues into belief systems. The integration of these designs across timbers, chests, and everyday objects created a cohesive visual language, emphasizing that artistry, ritual, and symbolism were inseparable in Viking burial practice. The chamber's design created a microclimate that preserved fragile materials, highlighting the ingenuity of Viking construction and ritual foresight. Soil composition, mound height, and timber arrangement all contributed to reduced decay, maintaining delicate fabrics and carvings for more than a millennium. Researchers had to carefully control environmental exposure during excavation, as the chamber's long-term stability relied on centuries of undisturbed conditions. Preservation revealed how Viking architects and artisans not only crafted the objects, but also understood, implicitly or explicitly, how their work would endure in a sealed context. Artifact placement, craftsmanship, and material composition offered evidence of social hierarchy, trade networks, and ceremonial complexity. Exotic materials and stylistic influences suggested connections to other regions, including southern Scandinavia and the North Sea trade routes. The combination of imported objects, local craftsmanship, and ritual integration emphasized both the individuality of the deceased and the broader societal networks in which they participated. Each item within the chamber contributed to a layered understanding of Viking life, demonstrating the intersection of wealth, authority, and spiritual belief in elite burials. Modern engagement with the tomb raised questions about preservation, heritage stewardship, and the responsibilities of archaeological research. Excavation techniques, conservation strategies, and display considerations required balancing knowledge with respect for cultural heritage. Scholars debated the ethics of removing objects from their sealed context, emphasizing careful documentation and preservation to maintain both physical integrity and interpretive potential. These discussions highlighted the ongoing tension between discovery and stewardship, a theme recurring in all investigations of ancient sealed chambers. Even after extensive study, questions remain about the individuals, ritual practices, and broader cultural significance of the Oseberg burial. Scholars continue to explore the social meaning of the dual interment, the symbolism of objects and animals, and the specific ceremonial rites performed. The intricate carvings, textiles, and preserved organic materials provide a rich yet incomplete narrative, inviting continued research, interpretation, and debate. In this sense, the Oseberg ship serves as both artifact and puzzle, offering glimpses into Viking civilization while withholding its full story. Carved timbers and carefully arranged treasures continue to hint at rituals and hierarchies that modern eyes can observe but not fully decipher. The burial chamber of Lady Di. Hidden for over 2 millennia within Maungdui, the burial chamber of Lady Di preserved an extraordinary glimpse into Han Dynasty ritual, artistry, and the delicate interplay of life and death. The tomb, discovered in Changsha, China, in the early 1970s, remained sealed for more than 2,100 years, revealing one of the most remarkable preservations of a human body in history. Enclosed within nested lacquered coffins and surrounded by textiles, silk, and ritual objects, Lady Di's remains provided an unprecedented window into elite funerary practices, social hierarchy, and the technical sophistication of early Han artisans. Every element of the tomb seemed deliberately arranged to protect both body and soul, preserving them for posterity while inviting scientific scrutiny. Nested coffins and meticulous lacquer applications created a hermetically sealed environment, demonstrating both technical ingenuity and ceremonial care. The innermost coffin, made of dense cypress and coated in thick layers of lacquer, sat within 2 progressively larger coffins, each serving as both protective shell and symbolic boundary. These layers, combined with clay walls and careful mound construction, created an almost airtight environment that limited oxygen and stabilized humidity. Archaeologists studying the site noted that the tomb's design was more than functional. It reflected a precise understanding of material properties long before modern preservation science existed. The very structure of the burial acted as a silent guardian of centuries-old secrets. Remarkably, Lady Di's body retained soft tissue, prompting early chemical analysis that revealed a combination of environmental factors and funerary design contributing to its state. Her skin remained supple, her veins visible, and the overall preservation was unparalleled. Researchers hypothesized that the microclimate within the coffin, combined with the chemical properties of the lacquer, soil composition, and potentially embalming practices, prevented the decay typical in human remains over such extended periods. The body's condition allowed scientists to examine organ tissues, revealing dietary habits, evidence of illness, and physiological characteristics of Han elites. The mystery of how organic material survived so completely has fascinated experts worldwide. Silk robes, delicate embroidery, and ornate accessories survived in astonishing condition, reflecting both wealth and the elaborate ceremonial dress of Han nobility. The textiles, dyed in vibrant hues of red and green, displayed fine craftsmanship and intricate weaving patterns, demonstrating a high level of artistic skill. Clothing layers corresponded to seasonal attire, status indicators, and ritual symbolism, with each fold and stitch offering insight into funerary protocols. Small personal items, such as jewelry, combs, and ornamental pins, accompanied the garments, emphasizing both decorative and symbolic purposes. Through these fabrics, researchers glimpsed the sophistication of daily life and ceremonial practice in elite Han society. Each coffin featured detailed carvings, lacquer layers, and wooden joins that combined aesthetic refinement with structural preservation, highlighting the artistry of the period. The lacquer not only sealed the coffins, but also protected them from humidity and microbial decay. Carved motifs on the outer coffins depicted mythical creatures, dragons, and symbolic emblems associated with power, longevity, and cosmic harmony. The precision and care applied to each layer reflected an intertwining of spiritual intent and technical knowledge. Every element, from corner joints to surface finish, conveyed both reverence for the deceased and mastery of materials, offering clues to the ritual sophistication of the time. Containers of food, musical instruments, cosmetic tools, and manuscripts illustrated a life of privilege and the ritualized provision for an afterlife. Bowls, ladles, and ceramic vessels held remnants of grains, fruits, and meats, suggesting offerings intended to sustain Lady Di's journey beyond death. Musical instruments, including bells and stringed instruments, indicated ceremonial music performed either during burial or in life, linking ritual and sensory experience. Cosmetic boxes and toiletry items reflected personal care and status, while silk manuscripts preserved philosophical texts and poetry, offering a direct connection to the intellectual and cultural milieu of the Han dynasty. Analysis of fluids, humidity, and microclimate within the tomb revealed how natural and artificial conditions collaborated to retard decomposition and preserve perishable materials. The chemical composition of the lacquer, combined with sealed air pockets and water-resistant layers of clay, created an environment that limited microbial activity. Researchers identified traces of water, oils, and other compounds that may have contributed to preservation, though the precise mechanisms remain partially unexplained. This combination of intentional design and environmental luck produced conditions so favourable that even soft tissues, silk and wooden artefacts survived intact, offering a rare, multi-dimensional snapshot of ancient life. Modern investigations, including tissue sampling, DNA analysis, and chemical testing, provided insights into Lady Di's diet, health, and daily routines centuries before her burial. Studies of hair and bone revealed nutritional patterns, while examination of internal organs indicated chronic conditions such as cardiovascular issues that affected her later years. Isotopic analysis traced food sources, including rice, meat, and freshwater fish, illustrating elite access to varied resources. Chemical tests on coffin residues and textile treatments offered additional understanding of Han funerary technology. These investigations bridged the ancient and modern worlds, allowing researchers to reconstruct a life with remarkable accuracy. The arrangement of objects, attire, and body orientation reflected Han cosmology and funerary beliefs, underscoring a deliberate intertwining of life, death, and status. Lady Di was laid supine, arms positioned to suggest both repose and ritual significance, while accompanying artifacts emphasized hierarchical social roles. Placement of silk garments, musical instruments, and food vessels corresponded to both spiritual and practical considerations, symbolizing sustenance, status, and protection in the afterlife. This meticulous organization demonstrated that Han burial practices were as much about ideology and belief as they were about preservation, conveying a narrative of society, hierarchy, and ritual for observers and future researchers alike. Spatial organization revealed a hierarchy of spaces, with inner coffins, layered chambers, and object placement conveying both protective and symbolic intent. The inner chamber contained Lady Di's body and personal items, while the outer layers housed additional grave goods, servants' objects, and ceremonial items, emphasizing layers of protection and symbolic separation. Each tier, carefully constructed, created a physical and conceptual boundary, guiding the deceased through both material and spiritual realms. The deliberate layering mirrored broader Han cosmological concepts, suggesting that tomb architecture was not only protective, but also a vehicle for ritual meaning and continuity beyond death. Handling and studying the remains demanded careful ethical reflection, balancing scientific inquiry with respect for cultural heritage and ancestral reverence. Scholars debated which methods best preserved the site while providing meaningful insight, weighing the desire to analyze against the need for conservation. Decisions about sampling, imaging, and display required sensitivity to both academic objectives and cultural considerations, highlighting the ongoing negotiation between research and respect. Ethical deliberations shaped modern engagement with the tomb, ensuring that its scientific value did not come at the cost of historical integrity or cultural dignity. In spite of extensive study, mysteries linger regarding the precise embalming methods, the significance of each artifact, and the broader narrative of Han funerary culture. Questions remain about how the lacquer, soil, and humidity combined to create extraordinary preservation, and why particular objects and arrangements were chosen for inclusion. Interpretations of symbolic meaning are informed but not conclusive, leaving room for continued scholarly inquiry. The tomb stands as a testament to both the ingenuity of Han artisans and the enigma of ritual practice, preserving layers of material and cultural evidence that resist full comprehension. Layers of lacquer, silk, and soil guard the secrets of Lady Di's resting place, leaving a silent testament to preservation and ritual that defies modern comprehension. The sealed tomb of Pharaoh Seqenenre Tao. The fractured skull of Pharaoh Seqenenretau bore silent witness to a violent end, and the sealed chamber that preserved his remains offered a rare, unsettling glimpse into the perils of ancient kingship. His reign over Upper Egypt during the fraught Second Intermediate period was marked by conflict with the Hyksos, a northern dynasty whose presence destabilized the region. The tomb itself, discovered in 1886 in the Theban necropolis, remained largely undisturbed until modern excavation techniques allowed detailed study. Every artifact, fracture and seal within the chamber contributed to a narrative of both royal authority and mortal vulnerability, offering archaeologists and historians an extraordinary window into a period where power and death were inextricably linked. Conflict with the Hyksos defined Seqenenretau's reign, leaving a trail of political tension and uncertainty that culminated in a death whose circumstances would puzzle scholars for centuries. Historical records suggest that his aggressive stance against the foreign rulers invited both military retaliation and internal strife, positioning the pharaoh as a target not only of external forces, but also of court intrigue. Understanding the context of his death requires reconstructing a landscape of political instability, where alliances were fragile and the consequences of miscalculation could be lethal. Every wound on his body, every item within the tomb became a testament to the intersecting dangers of kingship and warfare in this tumultuous period. Encased in shadow, the chamber's carefully aligned stone blocks and layered construction concealed both body and artifacts, reflecting the dual intent of protection and ritual symbolism in royal burial. The tomb featured a modest yet meticulously constructed burial space, with an inner chamber housing the body and a small collection of ceremonial items. Each layer, from mud brick walls to limestone seals, demonstrated awareness of the pharaoh's vulnerability and the desire to maintain ritual propriety despite the violent circumstances of his demise. This architectural approach highlighted the tension between urgent protection and ceremonial observance, emphasizing the deliberate care ancient Egyptians took even when confronted by the chaos of war. When researchers examined the remains, deep cranial fractures and facial injuries revealed a violent death, contrasting sharply with the careful construction of the tomb itself. The mummy bore multiple lacerations and crushing injuries, some likely inflicted post-mortem or during hurried burial procedures. These traumas offered a stark counterpoint to the deliberate and precise tomb architecture, underscoring the extraordinary juxtaposition of chaos and ritual order. The body's condition immediately captured the attention of forensic specialists and Egyptologists alike, challenging them to interpret how the pharaoh could be both violently slain and meticulously interred. Each wound told a story. Axes, daggers, and spears left distinct impressions, and forensic reconstructions traced the sequence of blows, providing a chilling account of the pharaoh's final moments. The nature and placement of injuries suggested multiple assailants and a sudden confrontation, rather than prolonged combat. Skeletal analysis indicated that some blows were likely delivered while Seqenenretau was restrained or incapacitated, raising questions about whether he fell in battle, was captured, or faced ritualized execution. The forensic detail embedded in his remains revealed both the precision of ancient weaponry and the brutality of the era, allowing modern investigators to reconstruct moments lost to history. Ceremonial items, inscribed tools, and fragments of ritual texts surrounded the body, emphasizing both the urgency of burial and the continuing observance of sacred rites. Small bronze implements, broken pottery, and linen fragments mark the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife. Inscriptions, though partially eroded, reflected prayers for protection and divine favor, suggesting that even in death, political turmoil did not entirely eclipse ritual devotion. The juxtaposition of trauma with carefully curated artifacts created a tension between violence and reverence, revealing the dual narrative encoded within the tomb, one of mortal peril and one of eternal kingship. The tomb's seal, created with limestone blocks and mud mortar, demonstrated that even in the shadow of violence, Egyptian mortuary precision remained paramount. Despite the pharaoh's violent demise, the builders took care to maintain structural integrity, ensuring the chamber would remain undisturbed for centuries. The sealing process incorporated overlapping stonework and thick mortar to guard against both human interference and natural decay, highlighting the sophistication of mortuary engineering. In this way, the tomb served not only as a protective enclosure, but also as a symbolic statement of enduring authority, even in the face of mortal fragility. Debate persists among scholars over whether the pharaoh's injuries resulted from battlefield capture, assassination, or ritualized combat, each theory shaping a different understanding of this tumultuous period. Some propose that Seqenenre-Tao fell in hand-to-hand combat against Hyksos forces, while others suggest he was ambushed and executed after capture. The lack of contemporary textual corroboration leaves room for interpretation, and each wound becomes a piece of evidence in a larger historical puzzle. Debates persist because the tomb preserves only fragments of the story, offering glimpses of violence, strategy, and ceremonial intent, but never the full narrative. The juxtaposition of a brutal death with carefully arranged burial objects illuminates ancient Egyptian concepts of kingship, divine protection, and the ritual continuity of power beyond death. Even in the face of violent demise, the inclusion of ritual texts, amulets, and ceremonial tools underscores the belief that royal authority transcended mortality. The careful placement of items symbolized both protection for the pharaoh's spirit and a broader statement about continuity of power amidst political upheaval. In this way, the tomb itself became a narrative device, communicating ideology, belief, and the social order to both contemporaries and future generations. CT scans, forensic reconstructions, and chemical analyses revealed insights into the pharaoh's injuries, age, and burial preparations, bringing clarity to a story shrouded in millennia of mystery. Modern techniques allowed researchers to visualize fractures, identify weapon types, and reconstruct the sequence of blows in unprecedented detail. Analysis of organic residues, textiles, and pigments provided context for burial timing and materials, while skeletal examination illuminated both health and lifestyle factors. The application of contemporary science to an ancient tomb demonstrates how technological advances can uncover layers of narrative and human experience inaccessible to earlier generations. Although research has progressed, the exact sequence of blows, the assailants' identities, and the full intentions behind burial choices remain enigmatic, leaving the tomb's secrets only partially revealed. Scholars acknowledge that while much can be reconstructed through forensics, some elements, motivations, immediate circumstances, and rituals performed at the moment of death remain beyond recovery. The interplay of violence, political intrigue, and sacred observance is recorded in bones, stones, and inscriptions, yet the full drama of Seqenenre-Tao's final hours is forever shrouded in uncertainty. Each unanswered question reinforces the tomb's aura of mystery, compelling researchers to return to its silent chambers with both respect and curiosity. The sealed chamber of Seqenenre-Tao has fundamentally altered the understanding of Egyptian military history, royal vulnerability, and mortuary practice. While continuing to challenge archaeologists and historians alike, its discoveries provide a rare fusion of forensic evidence and ritual practice, illustrating that death, politics, and belief were intertwined in ways both dramatic and subtle. The tomb offers lessons about human resilience, ceremonial care, and the extremes of vulnerability faced by rulers in a violent era. For scholars, every bone, artifact, and fracture serves as a touchstone for inquiry, bridging the divide between history, science, and the enduring enigma of mortality. Within the chamber, the silent wounds of a long-dead pharaoh whisper of political strife, mortal peril, and mysteries that time has yet to fully unravel. The inner chamber of the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent contains an inner chamber that has long intrigued archaeologists for its combination of ceremonial artifacts, architectural precision, and symbolic complexity. Carefully positioned stairways lead to the chamber, guiding both light and shadow in ways that suggest ritual intent. Walls adorned with serpentine motifs and geometric glyphs offer glimpses into the cosmology of Teotihuacan, hinting at theological principles now largely lost. Every artifact, from painted figurines to obsidian blades, is arranged with apparent deliberation, suggesting a space used for ceremonies that intertwine spiritual, political, and astronomical meaning. Even in modern silence, the chamber conveys a layered narrative of devotion and hierarchy. Teotihuacan's architects embedded sacred symbolism throughout the temple complex, ensuring that each terrace, platform, and corridor reflected the city's spiritual order. The feathered serpent deity dominates the iconography, linking earthly structures to celestial forces. Archaeologists have noted that ceremonial access likely followed strict social and religious protocols, emphasizing the connection between ritual knowledge and societal hierarchy. Patterns of murals and figurine placement indicate repeated ceremonial practice, while alignments with solar and lunar events hint at a cosmological framework. The temple's layout mirrors the city itself, suggesting that sacred spaces functioned as microcosms of social and spiritual structures, reinforcing belief through form and movement. The inner chamber demonstrates architectural sophistication through interlocking stones, narrow passageways, and supportive structures that suggest both durability and ritual significance. Entrances are deliberately angled, guiding participants through spatial thresholds that may have marked stages of initiation or preparation. Stone selection and construction precision reflect both functional and symbolic considerations. Tool marks, mortar layers, and block orientation suggest deliberate design decisions, balancing structural integrity with ceremonial meaning. The chamber's proportions create a sense of progression and awe, transforming the act of entering into an experiential ritual. Archaeologists observe that angles and surfaces were likely chosen to manipulate light, shadow, and perspective during ceremonies, adding layers of meaning beyond the physical artifacts present. Glyphs and murals within the chamber depict serpents, celestial bodies, and abstract symbols, forming a visual language that encoded ritual narratives. The sequences may represent cosmological cycles, theological concepts, or ritual prescriptions, combining observation of the heavens with mythic storytelling. Pigments, patterns, and positioning appear highly deliberate, suggesting that certain images were reserved for elite comprehension. The interweaving of serpent motifs with geometric forms hints at the connection between spiritual authority and celestial order. Scholars interpret these inscriptions as a ceremonial script, guiding participants in acts of devotion or marking cosmic alignments. Despite extensive study, their full meaning remains elusive, maintaining an aura of mystery and prompting ongoing interpretation. Artifacts within the chamber include obsidian blades, painted figurines, and ceramic vessels, many containing traces of organic matter. These objects suggest ritual offerings, divinatory practice, or ceremonial gestures intended to honor deities or mark significant events. Arrangement patterns indicate choreographed usage, perhaps aligned with processional or initiatory sequences. Chemical analysis reveals residues of pigments, foodstuffs, and incense, connecting material culture to spiritual practice. Figurines depict humans, animals, and mythological beings, reinforcing the symbolic and didactic nature of the chamber. Each artifact's placement contributes to an integrated ceremonial environment, merging aesthetic, functional, and spiritual purposes within a single sacred space. The chamber's construction employed overlapping slabs and precise mortar to maintain structural integrity and ritual sanctity. Layers of stone and careful alignment reflect both practical engineering and spiritual intention, demonstrating an awareness of the chamber's significance across generations. Reinforcements may have mirrored symbolic principles, with placement and orientation encoding cosmological ideas. The space's durability ensured preservation of both artifacts and inscriptions, allowing later observers to glimpse ritual practices centuries later. Design decisions emphasize the integration of form, meaning, and endurance, showing that the builders considered both spiritual and physical longevity in their planning. Every architectural choice supports a layered understanding of sacred and societal order. Excavation methods combined non-invasive imaging, careful stratigraphy, and detailed documentation, allowing researchers to study the chamber without disturbing its context. Laser scanning captured the chamber's spatial configuration, while photographic and chemical analysis preserved surface details and residue composition. Artifacts were catalogued with attention to both placement and material composition, providing insight into ceremonial function. These techniques revealed subtle features, including small recesses and wall textures that might have guided ritual action. Stratigraphic studies linked artifacts to specific construction phases, offering clues about the chamber's usage over time. Scientific approaches ensured that physical evidence could be interpreted while maintaining the chamber's integrity. Interpretations of the chamber's purpose vary, ranging from offerings and elite initiation to symbolic observation of celestial events. Astronomical alignments suggest careful integration with solar, lunar, or Venusian cycles. While the placement of figurines and murals may reflect initiatory hierarchies or ritual sequences, some scholars view the chamber as a ceremonial repository rather than a space for active practice, emphasizing the symbolic rather than operational role. Each hypothesis draws from structural, material, and iconographic evidence, acknowledging the complexity and ambiguity inherent in ritual archaeology. The multiplicity of interpretations underscores both the sophistication of the chamber and the limits of contemporary understanding. Enigmatic features such as unexplained niches, residue traces, and unusual object configurations continue to puzzle researchers. Small recesses resist practical explanation, while chemical remnants hint at ritual substances whose precise identity is uncertain. Figurines and glyphs are sometimes arranged in ways that defy clear logic, suggesting symbolic systems that remain partially inaccessible. These anomalies prompt interdisciplinary analysis, combining archaeology, chemistry, ethnography, and astronomy to interpret their significance. The chamber's unexplained aspects reinforce the sense that ancient ritual was complex, layered, and deliberately encoded, leaving investigators with both answers and fresh questions. Evidence suggests the chamber was central to both religious and political structures, with access restricted to the elite priesthood or ruling authorities. Artifact placement, wall symbolism, and architectural positioning indicate careful orchestration of both experience and visibility. Its role within the temple complex highlights the integration of sacred and civic functions, illustrating how spiritual practice reinforced societal hierarchy. The chamber's prominence within the temple aligns with ceremonial routes, processional vistas, and controlled visual perspectives, emphasizing the interplay of space, ritual, and power. Access and participation were likely governed by social status, reflecting the intertwining of religious authority and political legitimacy. The discovery of the chamber has reshaped the understanding of Teotihuacan architecture, revealing how urban design, sacred space, and ritual practice were interdependent. Scholars now recognize the city's ceremonial precincts as carefully orchestrated environments in which spiritual, social, and cosmic concerns intersected. The chamber exemplifies how architecture itself can encode ideology, teaching, and ritual knowledge. Its study emphasizes the sophistication of pre-Columbian builders and the intentional layering of symbolism within urban and ceremonial spaces. This insight continues to inform interpretations of other structures and artifacts across the region, broadening the scope of research on Mesoamerican civilization. Though scholars have examined the site closely, questions remain about participants, ritual specifics, and the deeper meaning of artifacts. The identities of those who performed ceremonies, the sequence of ritual actions, and the symbolic intention behind each object remain speculative. Material evidence conveys fragments of activity, but interpretation requires caution and imagination. Scholars continue to debate possible connections between architecture, iconography, and spiritual practice, acknowledging that the chamber communicates selectively. Its enduring ambiguity preserves both intrigue and challenge, inviting ongoing investigation into a civilization whose sacred practices remain only partially understood. On the walls, serpents intertwine with celestial markers, preserving rituals and knowledge that scholars have yet to fully decipher. The tomb of Kinich, Janab Pakal's consort. A narrow corridor carved into the hillside leads to the resting place of Kinich Janab Pakal's consort, a tomb whose walls whisper the ceremonial gravity of Mayan royalty. Situated within the royal necropolis of Palenque, the tomb lies beneath layered platforms and terraces, its entrance carefully concealed to maintain both sanctity and security. Researchers who first approached it were struck by the meticulous construction, which seems designed to command reverence even before one enters. Every architectural choice appears deliberate. The placement of steps, the slope of the corridor, and the density of stone masonry all indicate a sophisticated understanding of both engineering and ritual significance, suggesting that the tomb was meant to endure in both form and meaning. Stone blocks interlock with meticulous precision, forming chambers that suggest both the permanence of the tomb and the symbolic weight of the life it enshrines. The main chamber's dimensions create an intimate yet imposing atmosphere, commanding attention to the central sarcophagus and surrounding offerings. Ceilings rise just enough to draw the eye upward, while walls taper subtly to guide focus toward the burial niche. These decisions reflect an understanding of spatial psychology, linking physical experience to spiritual contemplation. Beyond mere practicality, the architecture conveys a narrative of authority and devotion, allowing those who enter to comprehend the consort's status within the royal hierarchy. The tomb's design integrates function, symbolism, and ritual choreography with deliberate precision. The threshold itself is adorned with subtle carvings, marking a passage not only between spaces but between worlds, guiding those permitted into sacred presence. These carvings depict serpentine motifs and stylized celestial symbols, resonating with broader Mayan cosmology. The doorways and angled entrances seem to filter movement, controlling the pace and focus of anyone entering the inner sanctum. Light entering through small apertures interacts with these carvings at specific times of day, casting ephemeral shadows across the walls. The architectural staging suggests that entry itself was a ceremonial act, part of a sequence of ritual observances intended to honour the deceased and the divine, while reinforcing the spiritual authority of the royal family. Hieroglyphs etched along the chamber's interior narrate ritual sequences and divine affiliations, encoding messages intended for eyes trained in ceremonial literacy. These inscriptions commemorate familial lineage, describe offerings, and invoke protection from the gods of the underworld and heavens. Some glyphs are painted with pigments that have survived centuries of humidity and time, revealing intentional use of colour to distinguish important passages. Scholars interpret sequences as a combination of historical record and ritual instruction, blending politics, theology, and ceremonial practice. Though partially legible, many glyphs resist complete translation, maintaining an aura of mystery about the precise meanings and instructions they once conveyed to initiates and priests within this intimate sacred space. Ceramics, jade ornaments, and carved figurines occupy designated niches, their arrangement hinting at precise ritual function and reflecting the social hierarchy of the court. Small bowls, elaborate pendants, and miniature effigies were not merely decorative but were likely employed in offerings, divination, or symbolic gestures tied to death and ancestry. Chemical analysis of residues indicates the use of resins, pigments, and possibly ritual substances in conjunction with the objects. Each placement appears intentional, forming a choreography that aligned with ceremonial practice and the spiritual journey of the interred consort. The objects collectively transform the chamber into a staged ritual environment, where material culture intersects with belief, authority, and the maintenance of cosmic order. Chemical traces of incense and pigment suggest repeated ceremonial activity, illuminating how the tomb functioned as a locus of both devotion and remembrance. Residual organic matter, such as pollen and burnt resin, indicates that rituals extended beyond burial, possibly marking anniversaries or dynastic ceremonies. Archaeologists infer that the chamber's enclosed space amplified sensory experiences of scent and colour, heightening the spiritual and emotional impact of each rite. Such careful integration of material, sensory, and symbolic elements demonstrates the sophistication of Mayan funerary practice, revealing how architecture, artifacts, and ritual were woven together to create a lasting testament to elite power and devotion. The chamber's sealed environment preserved organic matter unusually well, allowing modern researchers to study textiles, botanical residues, and wooden artifacts that rarely survived the centuries. Fragments of garments reveal weaving techniques and decorative motifs once reserved for royalty, while wooden ceremonial implements offer insight into ritual gestures and processions. Even minor residues of paint or lacquer provide evidence of the artistic sophistication employed in the tomb. The preservation is so remarkable that chemical and microscopic analysis can reconstruct aspects of the consort's burial, the ceremonial use of objects, and environmental conditions within the chamber. These details offer a rare window into Mayan mortuary precision and the value placed on ceremonial fidelity. Axial alignments point towards solstices and other celestial events, demonstrating how architecture and cosmology intertwined to reinforce spiritual and political authority. The tomb's orientation and internal layout echo broader patterns observed in Palenque's temple complexes, linking earthly rulers with celestial cycles. Light penetrates the chamber during key astronomical moments, illuminating glyphs or artifacts in deliberate symbolic sequences. This interplay between architecture and cosmos reflects a worldview in which social, spiritual, and natural orders were inseparable. Such alignments reinforce the notion that the tomb's construction was both practical and deeply ritualized, ensuring that the deceased remained integrated within a cosmic framework that extended beyond the visible cityscape. Scholars debate whether the burial reflected personal devotion, dynastic symbolism, or both, highlighting the layered meanings embedded within this intimate royal space. Some argue the consort's tomb functioned primarily as a demonstration of familial power, linking her status to Kinich Janab Pakal and the city's ruling lineage. Others emphasize ritual aspects, viewing the chamber as a stage for ceremonies intended to secure divine favor or facilitate the deceased's journey into the underworld. Competing interpretations demonstrate the chamber's complexity, where architecture, artifact placement, and iconography interlace to communicate multiple messages simultaneously, leaving modern observers to reconstruct intent from fragmentary evidence. Recessed alcoves and small unlabeled objects confound simple explanation, hinting at ceremonial practices that may never be fully reconstructed. Tiny figurines, unidentifiable tools, and unexplained deposits suggest rituals whose precise nature is lost to history. Some alcoves may have served as focal points for offerings, while others could indicate symbolic thresholds or cosmological markers. These enigmatic features challenge archaeologists to discern the interplay between practical utility, spiritual symbolism, and ceremonial choreography. Despite extensive analysis, portions of the tomb remain resistant to interpretation, emphasizing how even meticulously planned spaces can harbor secrets beyond modern comprehension. The tomb occupies a unique position within Palenque's royal necropolis, illustrating how funerary architecture reinforced dynastic continuity and social power over generations. Its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions and other royal tombs situates it within a deliberate spatial hierarchy, linking elite burials to civic and ceremonial centers. Patterns of orientation, elevation, and access underscore the interplay between political authority and ritual practice. The tomb's design demonstrates that death, memory, and governance were intertwined, with the consort's resting place serving not only as a private sanctuary, but also as a public symbol of dynastic legitimacy and cosmic alignment within the city's sacred geography. Even with advanced imaging and residue analysis, the chamber keeps certain secrets hidden, its full narrative incomplete, awaiting insights that may come centuries later. Modern techniques reveal walls, glyphs, and artifacts in unprecedented detail, yet the meaning of some symbols, objects, and structural anomalies remains tantalizingly opaque. Archaeologists continue to debate interpretations, balancing scientific observation with cultural context. The tomb thus functions as both a source of knowledge and a reminder of what has been lost to time, offering partial understanding while preserving an aura of ritual, power, and mystery that resists full explanation. The tomb holds fragments of devotion and authority that, while partially unveiled, continue to resist full comprehension, leaving its mysteries poised just beyond reach. The Qin dynasty noble tombs with mercury pits. The metallic scent of mercury hung in the air before the chambers themselves were breached, hinting at the dangers and secrets concealed within these imperial tombs. Archaeologists first observed unusual glimmers beneath the surface, and only upon closer study did the full extent of the subterranean network become apparent. These tombs were far more than mere burial sites. They embodied imperial authority, merging engineering, ritual, and symbolism. Each mound concealed pits and passageways saturated with mercury, reflecting the dynasty's obsession with permanence. The tombs were designed not only to preserve bodies but to project power across life and death. Researchers described the oppressive weight of history as if the mercury itself demanded reverence, keeping its secrets tightly sealed. Bronze hinges, timber supports, and carefully aligned stone slabs reveal a construction that balances practical engineering with ritual intention, leaving little to chance. Passageways were reinforced for both structural and symbolic reasons, echoing cosmic principles embedded in Qin ideology. Scholars have noted the uniformity and symmetry, suggesting that the tomb's layouts were governed by ceremonial precision as much as practical necessity. Even the smallest details, the positioning of beams, the thickness of walls, may have carried symbolic meaning. This combination of structural integrity and ritual design transforms the tombs into monumental statements of power, each artifact and stone placement a testament to the dynasty's vision of eternal authority. A faint shimmer rose from mercury pools, reflecting light in unsettling ways for the archaeologists tasked with documentation. Chemical analysis later confirmed mercury levels far above natural concentrations, suggesting deliberate use. The pools likely served multiple purposes: a preservative for the tomb's contents, a symbolic river representing immortality, and a deterrent against intruders. Subtle movements of light across the liquid surfaces created haunting reflections, reinforcing the chamber's aura of mystery. These pools became symbols of both fascination and hazard, a reminder that some boundaries were meant to remain inviolate, where human ambition collided with natural danger. Miniature figurines and intricately carved chariots occupied precise positions, offering insight into Qin mortuary rituals and social hierarchies. Bronze soldiers, horses, and attendants were arranged in formation, suggesting a miniature world designed to accompany the deceased. Weapons and ceremonial objects were carefully placed, reflecting authority and reinforcing cosmic order. The meticulous positioning indicates that each artifact held multiple purposes: functional, symbolic, and protective. Even under flickering light, the figurines seemed to animate the space, creating the impression of a society in miniature, frozen yet purposeful. The arrangement emphasized the connection between earthly power and the afterlife, a tangible reflection of imperial ideology. Careful placement of bodies alongside offerings and symbolic objects underscores rituals intended to maintain social hierarchy beyond death. Spatial orientation, proximity to mercury pits, and alignment with other chambers reflect complex funerary principles. Details such as the positioning of the head or arrangement of personal items adhered to prescribed rituals, ensuring cosmic harmony and authority continuity. Anthropologists suggest these practices were designed to reinforce both spiritual order and the deceased's influence in the afterlife. Ceremonial precision, encoded in the layout of objects and bodies, speaks to a civilization deeply concerned with structure, symbolism, and control over the unseen world. Timber lattices interlaced with earthen layers illustrate both structural ingenuity and cosmological symbolism, encoding visions of immortality into the tomb's design. Compact soil, strategically placed timber, and protective stone enclosures created both durable chambers and metaphoric reflections of celestial order. Researchers note correlations with numerology and cosmology, suggesting that architecture itself was a ritual act, bridging material and spiritual realms. Function and symbolism intertwined seamlessly, as each structural element served multiple purposes. The careful integration of engineering and ideology exemplifies a sophisticated vision of permanence, where the tomb's physical composition mirrored philosophical and religious beliefs. Recent analyses reveal mercury concentrations far exceeding natural levels, presenting both preservative benefits and hazards to those entering the tombs. Elevated mercury vapor confirms early reports of toxicity, emphasizing the risk for explorers. Some scholars argue the metal functioned as a symbolic barrier, while others view it as a literal representation of rivers or oceans within the afterlife. Researchers must navigate a delicate balance between discovery and danger, reflecting the duality of these chambers, both protective and enigmatic. The tombs continue to exert influence over the living, echoing the control once wielded by the deceased, and reminding modern observers of the risks embedded in ancient ambition. Imperial ambition manifested not only in scale but in meticulous attention to detail, showing how power, death, and ritual were inseparable. The nobility interred were surrounded by wealth, protective symbolism, and structured arrangements, all designed to project authority after death. Historical records reinforce the notion that rulers used tombs to extend political and spiritual dominion. The fusion of ideology and construction reveals how funerary spaces became instruments of governance, legitimizing power through ritualized architecture. Walking through these chambers, archaeologists encounter the material embodiment of ambition frozen in time, an enduring statement of dynastic authority and aspiration. Whether mercury acted primarily as a preservative, a deterrent to intruders, or a reflection of cosmological beliefs remains debated among scholars. Interpretations vary. Some see symbolic rivers, others barriers, while many suggest both. Analysis of artifact placement, soil composition, and chamber alignment points to deliberate design choices, still resisting full understanding. The multiplicity of possible interpretations contributes to the tomb's enigma, challenging researchers to reconcile ritual, symbolism, and empirical evidence. Each excavation raises new questions, even as it provides critical insights, reinforcing the sense of mystery that has long shrouded these sites. Certain side chambers remain untouched, and unusual artifact arrangements hint at features yet to be explored. Mercury saturation, structural anomalies, and artifact placements suggest hidden spaces, corridors, or objects still sealed. Remote sensing reveals glimpses of voids, but the full extent of these mysteries remains speculative. Even explored sections contain irregularities hinting at deliberate concealments designed to preserve knowledge from human interference. The tombs continue to challenge archaeologists, offering fragments of understanding while guarding deeper secrets, demonstrating the dynasty's enduring influence over both material and spiritual realms. The combination of monumental engineering and ritual sophistication influenced later imperial burials, establishing standards for power, protection, and symbolism. Successive dynasties adopted techniques and ceremonial practices, emphasizing both security and cosmic alignment. The Qin tombs exemplify a cultural precedent, illustrating the intersection of authority, spirituality, and mortuary architecture. Their influence demonstrates how a civilization codified ambition into physical form, shaping burial traditions for centuries. Observing these spaces, researchers are reminded that these tombs are more than historical sites. They're enduring statements of ideology and ritual, crafted to outlast generations. Every new examination uncovers subtle traces of the past, yet the mercury-filled chambers retain an enigmatic quality. Artifacts, chemical anomalies, and architectural nuances provide insight, but many questions remain unanswered. Each layer explored and every object studied contributes to a narrative of power, ritual, and preservation, yet the full story is incomplete. The tomb's creators succeeded in crafting a legacy that transcends time, compelling modern scholars to navigate a labyrinth of intention, symbolism, and danger that resists full comprehension. Even with advanced technology, the chambers continue to guard their secrets, challenging all who enter to understand their purpose. The liquid metal within these tombs glimmers like frozen fire, a testament to imperial obsession and a riddle that refuses to yield its secrets. The sealed royal tombs of Tanis. The glimmer of gilded sarcophagi emerged unexpectedly beneath shifting sands, revealing tombs untouched for centuries. When French archaeologist Pierre Montet first began excavating the ruins of Tanis in the 1930s, he uncovered a scene unlike any other. Royal tombs that had remained sealed, their treasures astonishingly preserved. Unlike the heavily looted tombs of Thebes, these chambers bore the weight of history without the scars of plunder. The shock of discovery was compounded by the scale and richness of the finds, which included elaborate coffins, gold funerary masks, and inscriptions that provided a rare glimpse into the political and religious ambitions of the Third Intermediate Period. Political intrigue and dynastic ambition shaped Tanis into a hidden capital whose royal burials remained largely obscured. Located in the northeastern Nile Delta, the city rose to prominence under the 21st and 22nd dynasties, functioning as both a ceremonial hub and a repository of royal power. Montet's excavations revealed that these tombs had been deliberately concealed, perhaps as protection against tomb robbers during a turbulent era. The juxtaposition of wealth and secrecy suggested a complex understanding of authority and ritual, one that reflected the precarious position of these dynasties, far from the traditional centers of power in Upper Egypt. Stone corridors and hidden chambers were meticulously aligned, demonstrating both engineering skill and ceremonial intention. The tombs were constructed with massive blocks of local limestone, carefully fitted to form passages that led to the central burial rooms. Some chambers contained multiple nested coffins, each inscribed with spells and offering prayers for the deceased king or queen. The architecture itself appeared designed to both awe and protect, creating a labyrinthine network that discouraged intrusion and preserved the integrity of the royal remains for millennia. Despite centuries of Nile floods and opportunistic looters, some tombs survived nearly intact, as if preserved by fortune itself. Tanis's location in the delta exposed it to shifting waterways and periods of abandonment, yet certain chambers had endured with remarkable resilience. Montet's records describe finding debris-strewn corridors alongside untouched burial rooms, suggesting a combination of chance, geography, and the deliberate actions of ancient builders. The preservation of these chambers offered a rare window into Egyptian funerary practices unaltered by human interference. Gold-encrusted jewellery, ritual implements, and inscribed coffins offered tangible connections to the lives and beliefs of Tanis's rulers. Each artifact carried both aesthetic and symbolic weight, from the intricate collars and amulets that adorned mummies to ceremonial weapons and ritual vessels. Montet noted that the treasures were arranged with careful intent, their placement reflecting religious and dynastic priorities. Inscriptions on coffins and walls recorded genealogies and titles, situating the deceased within the broader narrative of Egypt's complex political landscape. Certain organic relics had endured remarkably well, while others showed the inevitable passage of time, highlighting the tomb's delicate balance. Remnants of linen wrappings and fragments of wooden furniture provided insight into the burial customs of the period, their survival a testament to the dry, stable conditions within the sealed chambers. Simultaneously, traces of decay reminded researchers that even the most secure tombs could not halt the slow erosion of materials across centuries, adding urgency to the careful documentation and preservation efforts. Modern imaging and chemical analyses revealed hidden compartments and materials previously invisible to archaeologists' eyes. X-rays, ultraviolet photography, and chemical assays allowed researchers to study objects and human remains without unnecessary disturbance. These methods uncovered concealed inscriptions, additional amulets, and faint traces of pigments that hinted at original decoration and ritual significance. Each technological advance offered new layers of understanding, revealing that even within well-studied tombs, secrets could remain undiscovered for decades. Amulets, symbolic objects, and inscriptions suggested careful planning to ensure the king's spiritual continuity beyond death. Every item, from small figurines to elaborate sarcophagi, bore evidence of religious and magical intent. Montet observed that the tombs seemed designed to guide the deceased through the afterlife, with objects strategically placed to protect, empower, and honour the occupant. The presence of these ritualized items underscored the Egyptians' enduring concern with fate and the precarious journey beyond the mortal realm. Among the chambers, one tomb stood out for its extraordinary wealth and puzzling arrangement. Defying initial interpretations, Montet's excavation of Psusenthurt's tomb revealed gilded coffins nested within one another, surrounded by treasures that rivaled even Tutankhamun's burial in terms of richness and artistry. The unusual spatial layout and the combination of royal iconography with Delta-specific motifs left scholars debating the significance of these choices. It suggested that Tanis's rulers pursued a distinct approach to funerary representation, perhaps informed by regional customs and dynastic necessity. Facing unstable ceilings, shifting sands, and bureaucratic obstacles, excavation teams attempted to document each detail with precision. Montet's team had to reinforce corridors, monitor humidity, and carefully transport fragile artifacts to museums. Political changes in Egypt added further complications, limiting excavation periods and access to certain areas. The tension between the excitement of discovery and the practical challenges of preservation created a constant undercurrent of suspense during the decades-long exploration of Tanis. The placement of treasures and the meaning of unusual artifacts remain a subject of scholarly debate, offering multiple interpretations of the tomb's secrets. Some argue that the nested coffins reflect hierarchical or spiritual priorities, while others propose that certain objects were intended as protective talismans or even placeholders for rituals yet to be completed. The variation among tombs at Tanis suggests that no single model of burial practice dominated the period, leaving open questions about the intersection of politics, ritual, and personal preference in royal funerary culture. Though explored extensively, the tombs continue to inspire wonder, leaving questions about Tanis's rulers and their rituals unanswered. Each chamber preserves a silent narrative, chronicling ambition, piety, and the intricate balance between visibility and concealment. Researchers continue to probe inscriptions, cross-reference artifacts, and explore minor chambers that may yet yield overlooked treasures. The complexity of these tombs ensures that Tanis remains an enduring focus for Egyptologists seeking to understand the Delta's hidden history. Shrouded in sand and shadow, the royal tombs of Tanis still whisper secrets that no hand has yet fully revealed. The Tomb of the Two Brothers. The Tomb of the Two Brothers, a Middle Kingdom burial unearthed near the necropolis of Azut, had remained sealed for millennia. Its sandstone walls held secrets of two men whose intertwined lives were preserved in funerary texts and ritual objects, untouched by time or human interference. When researchers finally breached the tomb, the air that rushed inside carried centuries of stifled stench, a warning that the fragile equilibrium of the chamber had been abruptly altered. Even before the first sarcophagus was examined, the silence of the tomb seemed to pulse with the weight of its own history, heavy and resistant. Inside, the walls were adorned with painted hieroglyphs, remarkably intact despite centuries of burial beneath shifting sands. Scenes depicted the two brothers, Knumnacht and Nacht Ankh, performing rituals and receiving offerings from relatives, their visages serene yet rigidly formal. The tomb had remained untouched, preserving not only wood and stone but traces of organic matter long thought impossible to survive. Linen wrappings still clung to the mummified bodies, and the scent of resin once used to prevent decay lingered faintly in the corners. Every artifact seemed suspended in time, as though the chamber itself resisted intrusion. The decision to open the tomb was made with caution, yet the consequences were immediate. Air, light, and humidity invaded simultaneously, initiating a chemical and biological reaction that began to consume the fragile remains. Textiles that had survived thousands of years began to darken and fray within hours. Wood that had been solid for centuries developed microfractures along its grain. Even the painted hieroglyphs, previously vibrant with ochre and malachite, started to flake under the sudden exposure. Each artifact that was removed for study seemed to weaken further, a reminder that preservation had depended entirely on the tomb's hermetic isolation. Among the most notable finds were the two brothers themselves, their bodies mummified with care but vulnerable after eons. Knumnacht, larger and more robust, had been wrapped in multiple layers of linen, the inner folds impregnated with resin and oils. Nacht Ankh, smaller and more delicate, displayed a higher degree of desiccation, with his features remarkably intact. Researchers documented the preservation techniques, noting a blend of Middle Kingdom funerary practices that combined ritual with practical embalming methods. The contrast between the brothers' mummies underscored not only the individuality of care, but also the vulnerability of organic material once exposed to a modern environment. Objects placed in the tomb for ritual purposes revealed an extraordinary level of craftsmanship. Pottery vessels contained traces of food offerings, now desiccated and fragile, yet still providing clues to dietary habits and ritual timing. Small statuettes of deities, carved in wood and stone, exhibited faint traces of pigment, suggesting symbolic significance in the funerary rites. Jewellery of gold and semi-precious stones survived largely intact, though some delicate beads began to tarnish almost immediately. Each item, once isolated from the air for centuries, now showed the speed at which history could be undone by the simple act of opening a sealed chamber. The tomb's architectural design suggested an intentional isolation meant to protect its contents. A central corridor led to multiple chambers, each sealed with limestone blocks and plastered surfaces. Airflow had been restricted to prevent decay, and the spatial arrangement implied ritual significance beyond mere storage. Researchers observed subtle traces of incense burned within the tomb, evidence of a practice intended to sanctify and protect the dead. Even the placement of objects suggested a hierarchy of importance, with the two brothers at the heart, surrounded by offerings and personal possessions designed to accompany them into the afterlife. Chemical analysis of the tomb's interior revealed a delicate balance that had endured thousands of years. The microclimate within, stabilized by the seals and the surrounding desert, had preserved organic material against humidity fluctuations. Once breached, however, the chamber's fragile equilibrium shifted, allowing microorganisms dormant for millennia to reactivate. Fungal growth appeared almost immediately on linen wrappings, and traces of mold began to discolour the painted walls. Researchers realised that, despite careful laboratory conditions, some aspects of preservation could never be replicated outside the tomb itself, a stark lesson in the consequences of exposure. Even the tomb's inscriptions carried warnings that were long overlooked. Hieroglyphs referred to the brothers' journey through the Duat, emphasizing protection, ritual, and the sanctity of their resting place. References to divine guardianship suggested a cultural recognition of the danger in disturbing sealed chambers. The texts, once merely symbolic, now seemed prophetic in hindsight. The rapid degradation of materials reinforced the notion that some spaces had been intentionally isolated for more than ceremonial purposes. The tomb functioned as both repository and barrier, and its opening disrupted an equilibrium that had endured for centuries without interference. The excavation team documented each item with meticulous care, using photography, 3D scanning, and chemical sampling. Despite these precautions, they witnessed firsthand how quickly centuries of stability could vanish. The air introduced new variables, and the very act of observation seemed to accelerate decay. Linen fragments crumbled at the slightest touch, wooden boxes warped unevenly, and even the tiniest dust particles carried spores that threatened to alter the tomb irreversibly. Every step of recording became a negotiation with time itself, a race against the inevitable deterioration that followed the opening of a sealed space. Publications following the excavation emphasized the uniqueness of the tomb, highlighting both the brothers' lives and the implications for conservation practices. Scholars debated whether such discoveries should ever be fully opened, weighing the value of knowledge against the certainty of destruction. The tomb of the two brothers became a case study in the consequences of human intervention, demonstrating the fragile line between revelation and ruin. Lessons drawn from the site influenced approaches to other Middle Kingdom burials, prompting a reassessment of how and if ancient sealed spaces should be disturbed. Ethical questions shadowed the physical consequences. Disturbing the tomb meant violating a sacred space and potentially accelerating the decay of individuals who had been interred with intention and care. Archaeologists confronted the tension between scientific inquiry and respect for the dead, acknowledging that some chambers might have been sealed precisely to prevent exposure. The speed at which organic materials disintegrated after opening reinforced the idea that preservation had been the primary function of the tomb's seals, rather than mere ceremonial display. Each artifact recovered carried a weight of responsibility far beyond its material or historical value. The story of the tomb's discovery continues to resonate in the field of Egyptology. It serves as both a triumph of careful excavation and a cautionary tale, illustrating the fragility of ancient materials when separated from the protective isolation of their original context. Researchers continue to study the surviving artifacts and skeletal remains, yet much of what once existed has been irrevocably lost. The tomb, though opened and documented, retains a haunting sense of what might have been preserved had it remained untouched, an enduring reminder of the cost of curiosity. A subtle warning lingers in the chamber, as if the very air that entered carried a memory of silence that should never have been disturbed. The hypogeum of Hal Saflieni's closed chambers. Shadows pooled where the earth above Paula had long concealed a network of carved chambers, silent witnesses to rituals untouched for millennia. The entrance, little more than a narrow cleft in the limestone, gave no hint of the complexity beneath. Once inside, the air felt heavy, carrying centuries of stillness and faint traces of mineral scent that seemed to press against the lungs. Researchers advanced cautiously, aware that each step disturbed the balance maintained for generations. Every stone surface bore the faint mark of human hands long absent, a reminder that the hypogeum had survived both time and the gaze of intruders until this moment. Stalactite-like formations and rough-hewn walls formed a subterranean labyrinth, each turn revealing new depths where light barely reached. Passages narrowed unexpectedly, forcing movement with deliberate slowness, and the sound of footsteps echoed as though the chambers themselves were responding. In corners, the limestone glistened with moisture, suggesting that even slight environmental changes could ripple through the delicate interior. Researchers noted the shifting air currents, subtle yet perceptible, as if the tomb breathed with its own rhythm. Every angle revealed a shadowed recess, and every recess seemed to contain a fragment of the Neolithic world, frozen but fragile, ready to yield secrets reluctantly. Researchers first encountered skeletal clusters arranged in concentric patterns, interspersed with fragments of pottery and carved stone tokens that seemed deliberate and purposeful. The bones had been carefully positioned, some reclining while others stood almost upright in niches, forming an arrangement whose significance was not immediately clear. Small artifacts rested alongside the remains, some bearing traces of pigment, others polished smooth with age. The juxtaposition of organic and manufactured materials suggested ritualized behavior, yet the silence of the chamber allowed no interpretation beyond observation. Every item, fragile and ancient, demanded documentation with meticulous care, for exposure to modern air would begin a process centuries of sealing had prevented. Thick limestone barriers, once mortared and sealed, had preserved delicate organic material by isolating it from humidity fluctuations and the slow creep of decay. Researchers recognized that the tomb's microclimate had maintained stability over millennia, with air and temperature held in delicate suspension. When the seals were breached, that equilibrium began to shift imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Dust stirred, faint odours of limestone and decay mingled, and the smallest organic fragments became vulnerable. The very act of observation, necessary to study and preserve knowledge, paradoxically endangered the objects it sought to protect, a reminder that the Hypogeum had been deliberately insulated for reasons both practical and perhaps ritualistic. The remains displayed orientations and spacing suggesting ceremonial intent, each placement hinting at a symbolic meaning that modern observers could only speculate upon. Skulls were sometimes inclined toward niches containing pottery or figurines, and clusters of bones formed geometric or repeating patterns. Researchers catalogued these arrangements, noting patterns across chambers that might reflect ritual hierarchies or funerary sequences. Organic material remained surprisingly well preserved, with some skeletal surfaces retaining fine details of muscle and cartilage attachments. Every observation reinforced the idea that these were not haphazard burials but carefully orchestrated placements intended to endure, at least until human curiosity breached the seals. Faint illumination revealed niches and recesses where subtle shadows transformed bones and carvings into shapes that appeared almost animate. Torchlight and electric lamps cast textures that seemed to shift, giving movement to the otherwise silent stone. The interplay of shadow and form heightened the chamber's sense of otherworldliness, as if the dead themselves were watching the living intruders. Even small cracks in the limestone appeared like deliberate marks, shaping the perception of the space. Observers felt the weight of millennia in these shifting shadows, a quiet tension that suggested that the Hypogeum's secrets were not meant to be fully understood, but only glimpsed under careful restraint. As the chamber's air mixed with the outside atmosphere, minute disturbances became apparent. Pigments darkened, dust shifted, and organic material began to show early signs of fragility. Linen wrappings on skeletal remains darkened in minutes, and delicate pottery surfaces began to flake. Researchers worked under the constant pressure that each movement might irreversibly alter a chamber preserved for thousands of years. Airborne spores, once dormant, became active in the sudden humidity changes, and even simple touch carried the potential to accelerate decay. The subtle consequences of opening a sealed environment were immediate and undeniable, demonstrating the fine line between discovery and destruction. Small figurines, stone beads, and painted fragments testified to complex ritual life. Their craftsmanship preserved in a delicate state that demanded careful handling. Objects showed meticulous carving and evidence of symbolic colour application, with traces of ochre and black pigment on their surfaces. The arrangement of these artifacts suggested specific ritual functions, often found near skeletal clusters or in niches carved into walls. Researchers marvelled at the precision of placement and the care given to items that would accompany the dead. The preservation of material culture in such a fragile environment underscored the Hypogeum's uniqueness and the urgency of documenting each detail before the air that had long been excluded could erode it. Navigating narrow passageways and low ceilings required methodical care, every motion threatening the arrangement of objects left undisturbed for centuries. The team progressed slowly, their bodies contorting to avoid scraping stone surfaces or dislodging artifacts. Each footstep was measured, each hand movement deliberate, as the fragile equilibrium of the chamber demanded respect. Accidental vibration or careless pressure could shift skeletal remains or pottery, rendering centuries of preservation moot. Even with modern equipment and advanced techniques, the space imposed limits, forcing a rhythm of observation and action dictated by the tomb itself. The Hypogeum, carved during Malta's Neolithic period, reflects a subterranean approach to death. where burial and ritual merged within stone-carved chambers. Its architecture, combining narrow corridors, multiple levels and discrete chambers, points to complex social and religious practices. Archaeologists have noted the scarcity of similar subterranean structures in the Mediterranean, suggesting that the Hypogeum was exceptional even in its time. The evidence within, skeletal arrangements, votive objects, and pigment traces, provides rare insight into ritualized funerary practices, while the sealed chambers demonstrate deliberate protection against the passage of time, underscoring the sophistication and foresight of its creators. Documentation had to balance knowledge with preservation, for every interaction risked accelerating decay that time had long kept at bay. Researchers photographed, measured, and catalogued each artifact with painstaking care, aware that removing or even touching an object could provoke irreversible damage. Decisions about which items to sample or transport to laboratory conditions required judgment that weighed historical insight against ethical responsibility. Every procedure carried consequences, and even with modern conservation science, some deterioration was inevitable. The act of study was inseparable from the act of intrusion, highlighting the ethical tension inherent in opening a chamber designed to remain sealed. A sense of watchfulness lingered in the air, as if the chambers themselves retained a memory of the rituals that once animated them. Silence enveloped the passages, broken only by the careful steps and measured voices of the researchers. Time felt compressed, the present layered atop millennia of human activity, and every detail observed seemed to resonate with both life and death. The chamber's quiet authority reminded all who entered that some spaces are defined not only by what they contain, but by what they guard against, a threshold where human understanding brushes against the enduring will of the past. Secrets long sealed in shadow now trembled at the threshold, reluctant to reveal what lay beyond human understanding. The sealed burial vault of Saipan. The desert sun masked the entrance to the Moche burial vault, yet inside centuries of silence and careful sealing had preserved a world untouched by human hands. The tomb, discovered near the Huaca Rajada site in northern Peru, had lain hidden beneath layers of sand and debris, its adobe walls unbroken and its treasures awaiting rediscovery. Researchers approached with caution, aware that the air outside carried subtle threats to the fragile equilibrium within. Every step into the chamber seemed to cross a threshold between past and present, where ritual precision had maintained a delicate balance that modern intrusion would immediately challenge. Gold ornaments glimmered faintly in the shadows, their intricate designs speaking of wealth, ritual authority, and the meticulous hands that had placed them. Necklaces, nose rings, and chest plates reflected both the technical mastery of the Moche and the symbolic weight of their placement. Small beads of turquoise and shells interwoven with hammered gold, creating patterns that hinted at social hierarchy and spiritual significance. Even in partial illumination, the craftsmanship commanded attention, each object radiating a silent, almost sacred presence that underscored the tomb's importance and foreshadowed the fragility of what had been perfectly sealed for centuries. Adobe walls and timber reinforcements enclosed the chamber in layered compartments, a structure intended to safeguard its precious contents from both decay and intrusion. The builders had created subchambers, stacking spaces in a way that minimized exposure to environmental fluctuations, while simultaneously delineating areas for the ruler, attendants, and accompanying offerings. Timber beams had resisted rot, and the compacted adobe had remained resilient under centuries of desert conditions. The architecture itself conveyed deliberate intent, not only to house the dead but to preserve the materials of status and ritual, a design whose effectiveness became immediately apparent as researchers marveled at the undisturbed state of the tomb's interior. At the heart of the tomb lay the Moche ruler, surrounded by ceremonial regalia, his body positioned with careful attention to symbolic and hierarchical meaning. The individual, later identified as the Lord of Saipan, had been adorned with gold headgear, headdresses, and ornaments that marked him as both a political and spiritual authority. His remains were accompanied by attendants and offerings, carefully arranged to mirror the social order of life. The mummified body, though delicate, retained traces of ceremonial adornment, including textiles and organic elements that had survived due to the tomb's airtight isolation, making this discovery extraordinary in both archaeological and historical terms. Ceramics, jewellery and ceremonial items were arranged with precision, each object hinting at status, belief, or a ritual function preserved across centuries. Bowls and vessels contained remnants of offerings, while miniature ceremonial knives and figurines reflected symbolic aspects of Moche religion. Some objects bore painted motifs, with depictions of warriors, deities and animals, illustrating a culture that fused artistry with ritual meaning. Their careful arrangement around the ruler emphasized hierarchy and ceremonial order, a visual script encoded in material culture that communicated power, devotion, and funerary practice without a single written word surviving to interpret it directly. Textiles, leather and feathers survived remarkably, their colours and patterns still discernible, yet the exposure to air would soon begin their rapid deterioration. Brightly coloured cloths that had once covered the bodies or wrapped ceremonial items began to darken almost immediately, and delicate feathers, once vibrant in ceremonial headdresses, started to curl and fray. Researchers realised that centuries of stability had allowed these materials to survive in ways that modern laboratory conditions could not replicate perfectly. Every artefact, organic and inorganic, now carried the tension between preservation and decay, reminding those present that the tomb's sealed environment had been essential to its extraordinary survival. Thick adobe and strategically placed timber had created an almost hermetic environment, ensuring the tomb remained untouched, its balance of protection now irrevocably broken. Air and light, once absent, penetrated the chambers with disruptive force. Dust, spores and humidity began subtle chemical interactions, threatening pigments on ceramics and textiles alike. Even the heaviest gold ornaments stable for centuries were vulnerable to accidental displacement. Researchers approached every step with methodical care, understanding that centuries of careful design could be undone in hours. The tomb itself seemed to resist intrusion, a silent sentinel that had only reluctantly yielded its contents. Every movement inside the vault was measured, as the treasure's historical and material value made them vulnerable to theft and unintentional damage alike. Archaeologists and conservators worked in tandem, documenting, photographing and cataloguing, aware that each action carried consequences. The gold, while physically resilient, could be dislodged, textiles could crumble, ceramics could chip. Even the smallest miscalculation could trigger irreversible change. The vault, once an inviolable repository, had become a delicate ecosystem in which human presence demanded constant vigilance and restraint, a test of both skill and patience against the pressures of time and curiosity. The Moche civilization's elaborate funerary practices reflected a society where power, religion and ritual merged, and the vault's contents reveal the complexity of their worldview. Lords were not merely interred, they were surrounded by attendants, offerings and carefully orchestrated symbolism. Artifacts and remains together represented both social hierarchy and spiritual journey. The discovery illuminated aspects of Moche cosmology, revealing relationships between rulers, deities, and ritual spaces. The tomb's structure and contents demonstrated how wealth, power, and faith were encoded materially, and how careful preservation allowed these ancient messages to survive in suspended silence until modern researchers breached the seals. Amid tight quarters, researchers contended with fragile artifacts and the constant threat of destabilizing centuries of careful preservation, each action carrying weighty consequences. Working in dim light, they navigated the vault with both caution and urgency. Tools had to be adapted to reach delicate corners, vibrations had to be minimized, every measurement was both scientific and ethical. The team's expertise was tested at every turn, balancing curiosity with responsibility. Failure meant irreversible damage, and success required both patience and meticulous planning, for the Moche tomb demanded respect as much as it offered knowledge. Once the seals were breached, delicate materials began reacting to light, air and humidity, showing how centuries of stability could unravel almost instantly. Linen coverings on bodies darkened, pigments faded, and residues on ceramics began to flake. Even as conservators documented every object, it became clear that some losses were inevitable. The process highlighted the paradox of discovery. To learn, one must intrude, yet intrusion carries a cost that no amount of preparation can fully prevent. The tomb, pristine for centuries, now existed in a fragile balance between preservation and the inevitable effects of human intervention. The vault offered unparalleled insight into Moche ritual and craftsmanship, yet every revelation was tempered by the knowledge that human curiosity had altered what had survived untouched for so long. Researchers left with meticulous records, fragments carefully removed for study, and impressions of a civilization both complex and delicate. The discovery reshaped understanding of Moche's social, political, and religious life. Yet, it also served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of opening what was never intended to be disturbed. Each artifact became a testament not only to human creativity, but to the fragility of its own survival. Time no longer protected the treasures of Saipan, leaving them exposed to the relentless passage of air, light, and human hands. The tomb of King Midas's ancestor. Deep within the hills of Anatolia, a sealed Phrygian tomb lay undisturbed for centuries, its contents preserved in an almost miraculous state, until researchers finally breached its walls. The chamber had remained hidden beneath layers of earth and rubble, shielded from rain, wind, and human interference. When excavation began, anticipation and caution mingled in equal measure, for any misstep could irreversibly damage objects that had survived thousands of years. The tomb's careful concealment, long ago planned by its builders, had created a sanctuary for both the deceased and the material culture surrounding them, a balance now threatened by modern curiosity. The first breaths of air carried a faint musty scent of ancient wood and desiccated organic material, and the dim chamber revealed the muted glow of textiles and bones untouched for millennia. Researchers paused, absorbing the subtle details, the sheen of woven fibres, the curve of a skull, the faint traces of pigment still adhering to ceramic vessels. Shadows clung to the corners, giving the chamber a stillness that felt almost sentient. Every object seemed to radiate both beauty and fragility, a testament to the care of the original interment and the enduring stability of the tomb's sealed environment. Stone blocks and carefully fitted masonry formed the chamber, with compartments designed to isolate the body and artifacts from moisture, pests, and other natural threats. Internal walls and partitions created multiple niches, each tailored to contain specific offerings or ritual items. The precision of the stonework suggested a sophisticated understanding of both engineering and preservation. Tiny fissures were present, but the structure had largely resisted the passage of time. Researchers noted how the builders had combined natural terrain with human construction, using both to protect the integrity of the burial for generations, a precaution that modern air would soon challenge. The principal skeleton retained traces of hair, skin, and clothing, a remarkable survival enabled by the tomb's sealed conditions and the dry, stable environment of its enclosure. Linen wrappings, partially desiccated, clung to the bones, and some pigments applied to the textiles remained visible. Hair strands retained their shape, curled by time but preserved against decay. These organic remnants allowed researchers to reconstruct aspects of appearance, attire, and funerary ritual, offering insight into elite Phrygian mortuary practices. Every observation was tempered by urgency, for the delicate tissues and fibres that had survived untouched were now exposed to modern environmental stresses. Nearby, ceramic vessels, metal adornments, and ritual tools were positioned with clear intent, offering insight into Phrygian craftsmanship and the burial rites of the elite. Pottery, some decorated with geometric patterns and others with faint symbolic motifs, held traces of organic residues, perhaps remnants of offerings or ceremonial liquids. Bronze and iron tools lay in proximity, their placement deliberate, indicating social or ritual function. Jewellery, made of gold and other metals, complemented the body's adornment. The arrangement of these items demonstrated forethought and ritualised care, emphasising the deceased's status while providing a material record for archaeologists of practices that had survived in near-perfect preservation. Within minutes of exposure, delicate textiles began to darken and fibres frayed, pigments on pottery faded, and the subtle equilibrium maintained for centuries began to unravel. The sudden introduction of air, light, and minor fluctuations in humidity initiated chemical and biological changes that could not be reversed. Conservators moved swiftly to stabilize materials, yet even the most careful intervention could not fully prevent some degradation. Observers were struck by the immediate consequences of intrusion, witnessing firsthand the fragility of a burial environment that had been meticulously controlled by nature and human design for thousands of years. The body's placement, the orientation of accompanying objects, and the stratification of materials suggested deliberate funerary practices intended to honour the deceased and assert social hierarchy. The primary interment occupied the central niche, while secondary objects and possible attendants were positioned strategically around it. The layering of offerings indicated ceremonial sequences, and the proximity of certain artifacts implied symbolic or protective functions. Researchers pieced together these spatial relationships to understand how the Phrygians conceptualized death and the afterlife. Though the meaning of many choices remains elusive, the evidence revealed a culture attentive to ritual precision and respectful of hierarchical distinctions, even in burial. Photographing, cataloguing, and stabilizing each item, researchers moved with extreme care while contending with confined spaces, fragile materials, and the threat of immediate deterioration. Narrow passageways forced contortions, and even the weight of equipment had to be managed to prevent vibration or accidental contact. Every tool, brush, and measuring device was selected for minimal intrusion. Detailed notes recorded the precise location, orientation, and condition of artifacts. The team's movements were deliberate and slow, emphasizing patience over speed and highlighting the delicate balance required when modern intervention confronts centuries of careful preservation. Thanks to consistent humidity, minimal airflow, and protective soil layers, the tomb created a microenvironment that allowed organic and inorganic materials alike to endure far longer than typical for the region. Soil composition acted as insulation, timber partitions reduced moisture exchange, and the absence of light prevented pigment degradation. These factors combined to maintain a quasi-stable ecosystem for artifacts and human remains. Researchers noted that even minor exposure to the outside environment, air currents, temperature variation, and microbial activity would begin to undo what nature had preserved. Understanding these factors was critical to managing the immediate consequences of excavation. This burial reflects the social and religious framework of Phrygian society, connecting the individual interred to a lineage that would eventually lead to King Midas and offering rare evidence of elite mortuary practices. Objects, body placement, and associated offerings speak to a society where power and ritual were inseparable. The tomb demonstrates how elite individuals were honoured, both in life and death, through carefully constructed memorials and objects designed to communicate status and belief. Contextualizing these finds allows researchers to reconstruct aspects of governance, spirituality, and ancestral reverence within the Phrygian world, linking material evidence to broader historical patterns. Every intervention carried weight, as researchers were forced to balance the pursuit of knowledge against the inevitability of damaging objects that had survived untouched for centuries. Decisions about what to move, what to sample, and what to leave in situ had profound consequences. Conservators worked in tandem with archaeologists to mitigate deterioration, but the fragile equilibrium was forever altered once the tomb was opened. Each artifact represented both an opportunity to understand history and a reminder of the responsibility inherent in disturbing sealed spaces. The tension between discovery and preservation defined every moment of the excavation. After a thorough study, the chamber conveyed a haunting sense of presence, a quiet reminder that some histories are fragile and some secrets fragile still beyond recovery. Shadows lingered in corners, and the muted glint of metals and fibres suggested the persistence of past lives. Researchers departed with detailed records, careful samples, and a lasting impression of the tomb's extraordinary preservation. Yet the chamber's quiet authority remained, emphasizing that some knowledge arrives at a cost, and that the fragility of what survives is a reminder of both human and natural stewardship across millennia. Upon revealing its secrets, the tomb ensured that what had endured untouched for generations would never again remain whole. The sealed tombs of the Western Han empresses. Historians had long debated the location of the Western Han empresses' burial chambers, and when the sealed entrances were finally uncovered, they revealed a world of imperial luxury and hidden danger that had survived untouched for centuries. The team approached the site with a mix of anticipation and trepidation, aware that these tombs had been meticulously sealed to protect not only the bodies of empresses, but also an array of finely crafted objects. Historical records hinted at treasures, jade suits, and ceremonial artifacts, yet nothing could prepare the researchers for the delicate equilibrium preserved within centuries of isolation. The air was thick with the faint aroma of ancient resins and lacquer, and researchers were immediately struck by the precision of the carefully arranged artifacts and ceremonial objects. Bronze mirrors reflected faint lamplight, revealing polished surfaces that had remained unblemished for generations, while folded silk garments retained subtle traces of dye and pattern. Every detail seemed intentional. Objects positioned with ritual precision, compartments sealed with layers of clay and lacquer, and the faint scent of resin serving as both preservation and symbol. The atmosphere was charged with the weight of centuries, a fragile balance between reverence and decay. Layered clay walls, timber supports, and lacquered barriers created multiple chambers, combining practical engineering with ritual significance to isolate the tombs from decay and human interference. The construction demonstrated remarkable understanding of both structural integrity and preservation, with airtight compartments that minimized moisture and blocked pests. Researchers noted the ingenuity of ventilation control, using subtle design to maintain stability within enclosed spaces. The craftsmanship revealed not only technical skill, but a philosophical intent. The tombs were as much statements of power and afterlife belief as they were repositories of material wealth. Silk garments, jade burial suits, gilded ornaments, and bronze mirrors filled the chambers, each reflecting the Empress's elevated status and the extraordinary craftsmanship of the Western Han period. Every artifact was arranged deliberately. Jade placed near the body to ensure spiritual protection, mirrors oriented to capture symbolic light, and bronze vessels positioned to hold offerings. These items conveyed both wealth and ritual meaning, revealing the care and devotion invested in imperial burials. The opulence suggested a court deeply concerned with hierarchy and legacy, ensuring that even in death, the Empress's presence commanded respect and attention. The textiles retained intricate weaves, wooden objects resisted decay, and lacquered surfaces preserved their colour, a testament to centuries of stable conditions and careful construction. Fragments of silk still held traces of decorative patterns, and wooden figurines maintained their forms despite the passage of centuries. Lacquered surfaces, once thought too fragile to survive, revealed subtle artistry and coatings that had prevented microbial intrusion. The preservation spoke to a sophisticated understanding of material science, even if encoded in ritual rather than theory, and reminded researchers that the ancients had devised ways to protect their dead as carefully as their worldly treasures. Breaking the seals released toxic molds and chemical residues, forcing the team to take protective measures and revealing that these tombs concealed not only treasures, but dangers long hidden. The moment the first door was lifted, faint wisps of airborne spores prompted immediate retreat, and masks and respirators became essential. Ancient preservatives, combined with the sealed environment, had created a cocktail of compounds that could sicken the unprepared. The juxtaposition of beauty and hazard was immediate. Gilded luxury and silk garments alongside invisible threats that had slumbered for centuries, a stark reminder that history carries both wonder and peril. The placement of jade suits, ceremonial implements, and the bodies themselves suggested a highly ritualized hierarchy, reflecting the spiritual and social importance of the Empress's interment. Each body occupied a central niche, wrapped in layers of jade tiles sewn together, while accompanying artifacts radiated outward in deliberate order. Bronze mirrors, ceremonial tools, and lacquered figurines were positioned according to protocol, perhaps marking status, spiritual function, or symbolic protection. The careful alignment of objects within chambers illustrated the intersection of belief, power, and ritual, showing that mortuary practice was both an expression of imperial authority and a medium for spiritual continuity. Proceeding with meticulous care, researchers documented, stabilized, and sometimes left objects in place to minimize damage while contending with the tomb's hazardous atmosphere. Photographs, sketches, and written records captured precise artifact positions, while conservators applied stabilizing treatments to fragile silk, lacquer, and wooden items. The process was deliberate and slow. Even minor vibrations risked dislodging centuries of careful arrangement. Protective gear limited dexterity, and every action had to consider both human safety and the preservation of objects that had survived untouched. The excavation became a choreography of caution, knowledge, and respect for the past. The Western Han tombs demonstrate how imperial ideology intertwined power, ancestry and ritual, reinforcing dynastic authority and the empress's symbolic role in both life and afterlife. Burials were not mere resting places. They were statements of sovereignty, spiritual guardianship and continuity. The artifacts within, from jade suits to ceremonial vessels, reflected cosmology and social hierarchy, revealing how the empress's status endured in death. These tombs provide a lens through which historians can reconstruct imperial philosophy, religious belief, and the mechanisms by which the Han court projected power beyond the temporal world. Once exposed, the delicate equilibrium that had protected silk, lacquer and wood for centuries began to falter under oxygen, humidity and microbial activity. Conservators scrambled to mitigate deterioration, applying controlled humidity, consolidants and protective coverings where possible. Despite these efforts, some surfaces darkened, fibres weakened, and pigments began to fade almost immediately. The tomb's long-term preservation, a triumph of ancient engineering and ritual design, proved shockingly fragile once modern exposure occurred. Researchers were reminded that even the most carefully preserved past is vulnerable to the mere act of observation. Each action carried consequences, as the pursuit of knowledge came with the irreversible cost of disturbing chambers that had survived untouched for generations. Decisions about which artifacts to move, which to leave in situ, and how to document them required both expertise and ethical reflection. The team constantly balanced historical insight against preservation, knowing that their work would permanently alter a space once considered immutable. Every photograph and sample represented both discovery and intrusion, a reminder that the act of studying history inevitably leaves its mark. Among these ancient spaces, the tombs retained an almost tangible presence, a silent reminder that ancient grandeur could conceal hazards beyond mere decay. The combination of wealth, ritual precision, and hidden danger created an atmosphere of awe and unease. Even as the team departed, the chambers seemed to linger in memory, a place where opulence and peril were inseparable, and where centuries-old decisions continued to exert influence. Guarded in splendour and shadow, some secrets are warnings as much as they are revelations. The Tomb of Queen Puabi. The Tomb of Queen Puabi, hidden within the royal cemetery of Ur, revealed a sealed world where Sumerian power, ritual and ceremony converged in a burial untouched for millennia. When archaeologists first entered, the space felt suspended in time, as though the lives of the queen and her attendants remained momentarily present. The layout, the precise arrangement of objects, and the silent order of the interred evoked a civilization both deeply hierarchical and spiritually attentive. Historical records had suggested lavish burials for royalty, but nothing prepared researchers for the intricacy of this chamber, where human devotion and ceremonial purpose were embedded into every detail. Upon entering the chamber, researchers encountered a space dense with artifacts, textiles, and the quiet presence of those who had been laid to rest in service to the queen. Bronze and gold jewellery reflected faint lamplight, while ceremonial daggers, headdresses and musical instruments were meticulously positioned. The air carried the faint dry scent of ancient resin and preserved organic materials, a reminder of the careful sealing that had protected the tomb for centuries. Observers sensed a weight in the room that transcended material wealth, the echoes of ritual and the imprint of lives deliberately entwined with the queen's journey to the afterlife. Thick mud brick walls, vaulted ceilings, and carefully divided chambers reflected advanced Sumerian engineering designed to preserve both the queen and the treasures accompanying her. Each partition and structural reinforcement suggested a deliberate intent to protect specific sections, whether for ritual isolation, artifact preservation, or symbolic order. Researchers noted subtle architectural features that guided circulation through the tomb, likely intended to control access during ceremonies and to delineate zones of spiritual significance. The combination of technical skill and ceremonial design emphasized that architecture was a language through which the Sumerians expressed authority, devotion, and reverence. Jewelry, ceremonial weapons, headdresses, and musical instruments surrounded Puabi, each object a testament to craftsmanship, wealth, and the ritual significance of her position. Beaded necklaces, cylinder seals, and ornate combs lay alongside elaborately carved scepters and lyres, reflecting both aesthetic sophistication and spiritual function. The objects were not merely decorative, Their arrangement conveyed hierarchy, status, and ceremonial intent, demonstrating that material culture in Sumerian funerary practice served as a medium for both prestige and ritual communication. Every artifact seemed positioned with precision, as though to speak silently across the centuries about the queen's authority and her passage into the afterlife. Attendants placed alongside the queen appeared in solemn order, their positioning reflecting deliberate ceremonial practice and the grim reality of human sacrifice in Sumerian funerary custom. Skeletons were found near the central chamber, arranged with tools, jewellery and personal items, suggesting roles in service to Puabi even beyond death. Archaeologists debated whether these burials reflected voluntary devotion, coercion, or ritual obligation, but the consistent arrangement and grave goods indicated a purposeful, ceremonial act rather than random interment. The juxtaposition of luxury and sacrifice created an atmosphere of awe and discomfort, emphasizing the stark human cost intertwined with the grandeur of the burial. Remnants of textiles, wooden objects, and other organic materials offered insights into daily life, funerary practices, and the meticulous care taken to maintain the tomb's integrity. Fragments of woven garments revealed complex patterns, dyes, and weaving techniques, while wooden boxes and musical instruments retained their forms despite centuries underground. Even small items, such as combs and cosmetic containers, conveyed information about social rank, personal adornment, and the material culture surrounding royalty. The preservation of these organic elements allowed researchers to reconstruct aspects of Sumerian life, illustrating how funerary practice served as both historical record and ceremonial statement. The arrangement of artifacts, offerings, and bodies revealed layers of symbolic meaning, indicating both hierarchy and the Sumerian understanding of life, death, and the afterlife. Musical instruments were placed to accompany ritual, ceremonial weapons suggested protection or authority, and the spatial hierarchy of attendants reinforced social order. Researchers interpreted these arrangements as intentional, reflecting beliefs about the journey after death, the queen's continuing influence, and the broader cosmological framework of Sumerian religion. Each element combined to form a narrative that was both material and spiritual, a silent testament to the society's complex integration of power, devotion, and mortality. Excavation required extreme precision, as documentation, stabilization, and careful retrieval were necessary to preserve fragile objects and maintain the tomb's historical record. Photographs, detailed sketches, and written records ensured that artifact positions were recorded before removal. Conservators applied stabilizing treatments to textiles, lacquered wood, and delicate metals, while archaeologists carefully lifted skeletons to minimize disturbance. Protective measures were essential both for the preservation of objects and the safety of the research team, given the confined environment and potential for fragile materials to crumble. The process was methodical, deliberate, and respectful of the chamber's historical and ethical weight. The burial site reflected the political and spiritual role of queens in Sumerian society, where funerary practice reinforced both dynastic authority and ceremonial influence over the living. Puabi's interment exemplified how royalty commanded not only temporal power, but also spiritual oversight, with ritualized burial practices extending her influence into death. Grave goods, attendant sacrifices, and ceremonial arrangements demonstrated the intersection of social hierarchy and religious ideology, showing how the queen's role was both earthly and transcendent. In death, as in life, Puabi's status dictated the ritual choreography of the tomb, leaving a lasting impression on those who would eventually uncover her resting place. In uncovering Puabi's tomb, scholars confronted profound ethical questions, balancing the need to study it with the reality that human lives had been purposefully ended as part of the burial. Excavation illuminated cultural practices while simultaneously exposing the stark moral dimensions of past rituals. Every skeleton and artifact posed a question: how far should modern researchers intervene in spaces that were intentionally created for ritual sacrifice? These considerations permeated the work, creating a tension between historical understanding and ethical responsibility, as each decision in the tomb had consequences for both the past and the present. Fragile objects, textiles, and skeletal remains required constant attention to prevent deterioration once exposed, highlighting the fragility of ancient material culture, even in controlled excavations. Conservators worked to slow the decay of organic materials, using controlled environments and chemical treatments, while metals were stabilized to prevent corrosion. Despite these efforts, the tomb's exposure to light, oxygen, and modern microbes meant that some artifacts inevitably began to degrade. Researchers recognized that the act of study itself carried risk, underscoring the paradox of archaeology. Understanding the past can require altering the very world one seeks to preserve. Following an exhaustive study, the tomb retained a haunting presence, a space where human devotion, opulence, and mortality intertwined in a silent narrative of ritual and power. The juxtaposition of wealth, ceremonial sophistication, and deliberate sacrifice left an indelible impression, a reminder that funerary architecture and material culture communicate more than visual splendor. They convey human intention, belief, and consequence. Scholars departed with extensive records, yet the chamber seemed to linger in memory, a silent witness to acts of devotion and ritual that modern minds could study but never fully inhabit. In Queen Pwabi's resting place, grandeur and sacrifice lingered together, leaving questions that neither time nor research could fully resolve. The sealed catacombs beneath Naples. A hidden network of tunnels and chambers had remained untouched for centuries in Naples, its sealed entrances preserving a silent record of those who had once been interred within. When researchers finally breached the barriers, they were met with an oppressive stillness, the kind that fills spaces untouched by human breath for generations. The labyrinth stretched unpredictably, a testament to both ancient engineering and the careful concealment of human remains. Shadows flickered across the walls as lamps illuminated niches and alcoves, revealing centuries of ritual, neglect, and careful preservation. Each corridor seemed to carry the weight of countless untold stories waiting to be discovered. The air was dense with moisture, earthy and slightly metallic, mingling with the faint scent of centuries-old dust. Every step echoed across uneven stone floors, amplifying the sensation that the catacombs themselves were listening. Skeletal remains lined the walls in methodical arrangements, some accompanied by inscriptions in Latin or simple crosses etched into the rock. The flickering lamps revealed fragments of pottery and carved stone markers, evidence of rituals long forgotten. Researchers moved cautiously, knowing that disturbing even a single object could trigger a cascade of loss or damage. The chamber's silence seemed almost sentient, demanding both reverence and restraint. Tunnels stretched in irregular patterns, intersecting at angles that were purposeful yet disorienting, supported by masonry and timber that had weathered centuries. Vaulted ceilings and arched corridors hinted at deliberate architectural design, a combination of pragmatism and ceremonial consideration. Some sections had been reinforced repeatedly over the ages, while others were crumbling under the pressure of centuries of earth above. The catacombs were more than burial sites, they were subterranean cities of the dead, carefully organized yet labyrinthine enough to conceal secrets in every corner. Navigating the passages required both mapping and intuition, as missteps could lead to hidden pitfalls or lost chambers. Remains rested in carefully arranged rows, often facing east, reflecting consistent burial practices among Roman and early Christian communities. Simple markers, crosses and inscriptions indicated both rank and religious affiliation, though many had been obscured by the passage of time. Skeletons of children, adults and the elderly shared the narrow spaces, placed with ritualistic consideration to preserve hierarchy and communal structure. Archaeologists documented each arrangement meticulously, noting patterns that might reveal social or spiritual significance. The stark juxtaposition of human fragility and architectural endurance underscored the haunting intimacy of these underground spaces. Portions of the ceilings were weakened, stones loose from centuries of pressure and shifting soil, creating an ever-present risk of collapse. Dust and small debris hinted at instability, reminding researchers that even careful exploration carried danger. The labyrinth seemed alive with its own unpredictable threats, as hidden cracks and fragile supports threatened to give way under minimal strain. Every movement required deliberation, scaffolding placement, and careful attention to weight distribution. Structural engineers worked alongside archaeologists to assess the tunnels, ensuring that curiosity would not irreversibly transform history into rubble. Scattered among the chambers were traces of human activity preserved through the centuries. broken oil lamps, small ceramic vessels, and simple religious symbols. These objects offered insight into the daily and spiritual lives of those who had prepared the dead for interment. Even fragments of inscriptions suggested personal devotion, messages left for the afterlife or for the living who might one day pass through these catacombs. While modest compared with the grandeur of royal burials elsewhere, the artifacts conveyed profound significance, testifying to the care and attention invested in even the humblest of interments. As soon as they were opened, the chambers became vulnerable to environmental shifts. Humidity and air circulation accelerated the decay of organic materials, while microbial growth threatened to destabilize bones and remaining textiles. Archaeologists faced the paradox of study. The act of examination itself jeopardized preservation. Each discovery brought both insight and responsibility, forcing careful consideration of which objects could be safely removed, documented, or left in situ. The catacombs' centuries of isolation had preserved them, but human curiosity introduced new variables demanding constant vigilance. Using scaffolding, controlled lighting, and extensive documentation, researchers navigated the catacombs safely. Every wall, every niche, and every artifact was recorded through photographs, sketches, and written observation. Conservative techniques ensured that no part of the fragile environment was unnecessarily disturbed, while careful mapping allowed for future research without repeated intrusion. The work demanded patience, precision, and a recognition that time itself had made these chambers both valuable and perilous. In this underground world, each decision carried weight beyond mere academic interest, touching on ethics, history, and the preservation of human memory. The catacombs reflect both the spiritual and pragmatic considerations of their creators. Roman and early Christian communities used these subterranean spaces to honor the dead, consolidate urban space, and enact rituals that bridged life and afterlife. The careful alignment of tombs, the placement of markers, and the preservation of objects all communicated social, religious, and civic priorities. Understanding these patterns required more than archaeological skill. It demanded cultural insight and a sensitivity to the intentions encoded in stone, mortar, and ritual practice. The underground passages were living records of human belief, waiting for attentive eyes to decode their stories. Opening these long-forgotten tombs had consequences beyond the academic. Exposure threatened the integrity of skeletal remains, accelerated decay, and revealed hazards that had remained dormant for centuries. Even careful handling could not entirely mitigate the fragility of the space, and researchers faced the constant awareness that each step might irreversibly alter the history preserved in stone. Ethical considerations are intertwined with structural concerns, highlighting the responsibility inherent in disturbing spaces designed for eternal rest. The catacombs demanded respect, not only for what they contained, but also for the forces of time they had resisted. The labyrinth of tunnels and chambers stands as a monument to human mortality and the impermanence of earthly structures. Despite careful preservation and study, decay continues quietly, eroding both physical remains and the knowledge encoded in their arrangement. The catacombs illustrate the tension between permanence and vulnerability, showing how even meticulously engineered spaces eventually surrender to time. Each corridor, each niche, and each artifact is a reminder of the delicate balance between preservation and the relentless progression of centuries. The underground necropolis retains both awe and warning in equal measure. After careful mapping and analysis, the catacombs retained an almost tangible threat, a reminder that some histories are as fragile as they are hidden. Researchers departed with detailed records, yet the space seemed to echo with the past, silent but alive with the weight of its former inhabitants. Every shadow and fissure hinted at untold stories, lost artifacts, and unseen chambers still waiting to be rediscovered. The labyrinth's silence persisted, but it no longer belonged solely to the past. It had become a shared space between centuries and those who dared to enter. Centuries of silence had been shattered, and with each cautious step the weight of the past pressed inexorably forward. The burial chamber of the Egtved girl. A modest Bronze Age barrow concealed the Egtved girl's resting place for over 3 millennia, her chamber sealed against time until researchers carefully breached its threshold. The small tomb, simple yet meticulously constructed, had remained untouched, preserving a fragile ecosystem of organic materials that defied centuries of decay. The air inside was still, carrying the faint aroma of soil and ancient resin, as if the burial had paused the world above. Shadows from delicate lamps revealed textures of wool, leather, and hair that had survived remarkably intact. Each element seemed suspended between eras, a delicate testament to human presence and absence simultaneously. The first glimpse revealed a space saturated with earthy scents and the subtle aroma of ancient resin, where preserved textiles and skeletal remains seemed suspended between past and present. Researchers moved cautiously, mindful that the fragile environment could collapse under sudden exposure. Even slight shifts in humidity caused faint movements of the wool fibres, a reminder that the tomb's integrity was dependent on centuries of undisturbed stillness. The scent of centuries mingled with the modern instruments used to record every detail, producing a sensory tension between antiquity and contemporary study. In the stillness, the chamber almost seemed to hold its breath. Constructed with layers of oak planks and surrounded by carefully compacted earth, the tomb had protected its contents with precise yet understated engineering, designed for both concealment and preservation. The wooden structure, though modest in appearance, reflected knowledge of materials, decay, resistance, and spatial arrangement, ensuring that the body and associated artifacts remained untouched for millennia. Researchers noted the placement of planks and soil as a deliberate effort to create stable microclimates with minimal airflow and moisture fluctuations. Every architectural choice seemed to serve dual purposes, safeguarding the deceased and leaving a controlled environment for future observers, even if those observers would only arrive thousands of years later. The girl's skeleton lay curled, her bones remarkably intact, revealing her age and stature, while the arrangement suggested ritualized placement rather than random interment. Osteological analysis indicated she was a teenager at the time of death. Healthy by the standards of her era, yet the burial emphasized her social and familial role. Limbs were positioned deliberately, aligned with subtle spatial cues within the tomb that echoed Bronze Age burial conventions. Each bone's placement contributed to the narrative of care, intent, and ritual observance. Observers were confronted not only with human fragility, but also with the intentionality embedded in death, a choreography of respect and remembrance preserved through time. Woolen garments, hair, and leather accessories survived in surprising detail, their textures and dyes providing insight into Bronze Age craftsmanship, yet each piece trembled at the exposure to open air. The preservation of colour, weave, and hair structure revealed a level of material sophistication unexpected for a society often assumed to be rudimentary. Even as researchers documented the garments, threads began to fray and pigments dulled, underscoring the ephemeral nature of organic matter. The juxtaposition of extraordinary survival with immediate vulnerability created a tension between admiration and anxiety, highlighting the paradoxical beauty and fragility of ancient life. Bronze pins, small wooden containers, and ornaments lay nearby, minimal yet telling markers of her status, offering glimpses into personal adornment and social symbolism of the era. Each artifact provided a tactile connection to the Egged girl's identity, hinting at daily practices, aesthetic sensibilities, and perhaps familial or spiritual roles. Unlike tombs laden with wealth, these objects were intimate, functional, and symbolic, illustrating that status could be expressed in subtle, carefully chosen items. Their placement within the chamber indicated deliberate intention, a personal narrative encoded in the selection and positioning of objects alongside the body. Maintained by the soil's chemical composition and stable moisture, the tomb's exceptional preservation relied on a delicate balance now disturbed by modern intrusion. Researchers noted the acidity and compaction of the earth, factors that inhibited bacterial activity and slowed decomposition. Once the seals were breached, this equilibrium shifted, and the tomb's microclimate began to deteriorate almost immediately. It became clear that the act of observation itself threatened the very survival of the materials that had endured so long, a stark illustration of the fragile boundary between knowledge and loss. Excavation required meticulous stabilization, with every textile supported and documented before removal, as even the slightest misstep could result in irretrievable loss. Researchers employed fine brushes, controlled lighting, and scaffolding to prevent movement that could damage both artifacts and the skeletal remains. Photography, sketches, and written records captured details that might vanish within hours of exposure. The process resembled both surgery and ritual, each movement executed with precision, reverence, and constant awareness of the tomb's delicate environment. Preservation became a constant negotiation between understanding and interference. Bronze Age burial practices in Denmark reflected social stratification, spiritual belief, and care for the dead, each tomb serving as both a personal memorial and a societal statement. The Ejjetived girls' interment demonstrated cultural priorities, emphasizing careful attention to clothing, body positioning, and minimal yet meaningful grave goods. The tomb's construction suggested respect for the individual within a broader communal framework, balancing personal identity with shared spiritual norms. By studying these practices, researchers gained insight into the nuanced social and religious life of Bronze Age Denmark, revealing how even small chambers could communicate profound cultural significance. Exposure to light, oxygen, and fluctuating humidity caused immediate deterioration, demonstrating how fragile these artifacts were despite surviving thousands of years underground. Wool fibres began to curl and fray, leather darkened and stiffened, and even subtle traces of hair pigments were lost within days. Each element, previously stable for centuries, now showed vulnerability under conditions taken for granted above ground. The tension between curiosity and conservation underscored the ethical and scientific challenges of archaeology, where discovery inevitably risked destruction. Researchers were reminded that time's preservation is delicate and that human intervention carries irreversible consequences. The Ejjetived girl's tomb became a meditation on impermanence, where the delicate line between survival and decay emphasized both the passage of time and the fragility of memory. Scholars reflected on how even carefully engineered tombs, constructed to last centuries, remain vulnerable to natural forces and human intrusion. Each artifact, each textile, and each bone became a symbol of the transient nature of material culture, highlighting that preservation is never absolute. In observing her remains, researchers confronted the impermanence inherent in all human endeavours, where memory, material, and time exist in a precarious balance. Haunted by its own past, the chamber seemed to breathe with its own history, a silent witness to the fragility of human endeavours and the unpredictable consequences of revealing what was meant to remain hidden. Shadows from instruments and lamps traced the contours of wood, textiles, and bone, casting the tomb in a light both revealing and ephemeral. Despite exhaustive documentation, some details would be lost forever to the simple chemistry of exposure and decay. The space retained its quiet authority, an enduring reminder that certain histories are partially accessible only for a fleeting moment, suspended between survival and disappearance. The moment it was unsealed, the Ejjetived girl's tomb whispered that even millennia of preservation could be undone in an instant,